Everyone else woke up to a wide, clean lake. I woke up to a muddy puddle no wider than I was tall, ranked dead last in Grassland World, 8.4 billion. My name is Jang Hyunjin. Then the deep hook system awakened with the talent catch forecast and told me my puddle did not grow wider. It grew down. The worst source in the migration alone reached the drowned world, and the dead last joke became rank 1. Wide and shallow runs dry. Deep never runs out. Hit subscribe and like the video before we start. It's the only way this channel grows. But how did this start? Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. The morning the world ended, I was on the train, counting how many days my paycheck had left in it. Then the train was gone, the city was gone, and I was standing in grass that ran all the way to the edge of the sky. It took me a moment to register how quiet it was. Every sound I had spent my whole life hearing without noticing had stopped at once. Only wind moving through grass, and the grass going on in every direction with nothing to stop it. A voice with no warmth in it told me what had happened, and it told all of us at once. Every human alive, 8.4 billion, had been moved to a place it called Grassland World for a survival migration. Each of us had been given one water source and one life. The water source was the whole game. Food, drinking water, tools, shelter, trade, all of it came out of whatever water the system had dropped at our feet. It opened the rest in the same breath, the ranking lists and the regional and global chats and a market channel, and then it left us with one warning before it went quiet. The starter pack would not last. The grassland night would not wait. And not everything that took the hook would be a fish. Each of us got a piece of that grassland to live on, and the pieces were huge. 1,000 acres a person, the system said, so wide I could not see where mine ended in any direction. The next survivor was somewhere past the horizon, too far to walk to and too far to see. For the first days, the only place any of us existed to each other was the chat, and the chat was already loud with what everyone had found at the center of their land. Most people found a lake, wide clean water with fish breaking the surface, a boat tied at a shore, nets folded and waiting. Somebody posted an image of one that ran to the horizon. I walked to the center of mine and found a puddle. It sat behind a broken patch of grass, brown, no wider than I was tall and not much deeper, a skin of mud on top and a sour stagnant smell coming off it. When I crouched and looked into it, I could see exactly what I had to work with. A few mudworms turning in the silt, some shrimp smaller than my smallest fingernail. No fish, no clean water, and barely room to swing a line before the hook found the far bank. The ranking list counted every survivor alive from the best source to the worst, and put a number next to my name. Rank 8.4 billion. Dead last. Out of everyone. I was 20 years old. The regional chat found me about 10 seconds later. I will spare you the names they came up with. Most of them used the word puddle, and at least one came with a drawing. I looked at the number once, then I put it down. The rank was a fact, and staring at a fact does not change it, and it does not catch fish. The lake owners could spend the first day bragging about their boats in chat. I had a more pressing problem, which was that the sun was already past noon, and the system had been clear that the night would not wait. So I stopped reading chat, knelt in the dirt, and looked at the worst fishing rod ever made. The starter pack was the same for all of us, the same whether the system had handed you a sea or a hole in the ground. 2 pieces of bread, 2 bottles of fresh water, 3 lumps of gray bait, 1 rod from the gacha, and the gacha had hated me. The line was thin enough to snap if I looked at it wrong. The hook came out of the wrapper already bent, the point twisted off so it would skate across a fish's mouth instead of setting. Counting was the one skill I had carried over from the old world. 3 years of stretching a paycheck across a month, skipping lunch so the rent cleared, learning down to the coin what I could spend and what I had to keep. None of that had changed. Out here, a bottle of water was a day of life I would have to pay for, and I did not have many. The bent hook I could fix. I snapped a thorn off the dead grass behind the puddle and worked the point straight, slow, so the cheap metal did not shear off in my hand. When the barb sat true, I pinched 1/3 of one bait lump onto it. 1/3, not the whole thing. A man who burns his whole supply on the first cast deserves whatever the day does to him after. Somewhere past the horizon, the chat was full of people hauling in their first fish, calling out catch counts, comparing hauls. I muted most of it, dropped my crooked hook into the brown water, and waited. The line twitched. I pulled, and a mud shrimp came up, gray, ugly, and the size of my thumb, kicking on the barb. Worthless on any market. I had my hand half open to throw it back. Then a pane of pale blue light opened in the air a hand's width from my face, and a voice colder than the welcome read one line into the quiet. Deep hook system awakened. I went still. In the chat, people had spent the last hour posting their own unlocks, talents, source readings, bragging over everyone, and not one of them had sounded like this. The light kept writing. Water source identified. Classification, baby depth spring. Then a second line, smaller under the first. A depth spring does not grow wider, it grows deeper. Every catch pulled from it deepens the source. The deeper the source, the rarer what answers the hook. In every channel, 8 billion people were measuring their luck by how much water they had been handed to look at. The system had just told me, where nobody else could hear it, that the size on the surface was the part that did not matter. The lakes were wide and shallow. Wide and shallow runs out. Mine grew the other direction, down. and down was where it was keeping everything worth having. A third box opened under the second. Talent unlocked. Catch forecast. The water blurred, and for half a breath I saw 3 shapes laid over it that were not there, each one carrying a feeling I could not have put into words. A cluster of more mud shrimp near the top. Easy. Worth almost nothing. A bitter oil fish a little lower. More food and more work to land. And deeper, coiled where the brown went black. Something long, with a low hum coming off it and a warning I felt in my teeth before I understood it. The forecast showed me the next few things I could pull up and roughly what each would cost me to land. It did not choose for me. That was the whole point of it. Every cast was a decision now instead of a gamble. I could fish the safe shrimp all day and starve slowly, or I could go down after the thing with the hum and find out what the system meant by rarer. I started with the oil fish, because I was not going to reach for the most dangerous thing in the water before I could even stand up and just feed it my bait. It fought sour and slow, and came up bitter. Too bitter to enjoy, but it was food, and the skin and the small sack of oil inside it were material I could use or sell. I cleaned it on a flat stone, set the meat aside, and kept the oil. I caught 2 more shrimp after that, and on the second one I felt the puddle change under my knees, a small drop somewhere below the surface, the floor of it going down a finger's width. Earned, not given. The system meant exactly what it said. Every catch took the spring a little deeper, and I sat there with a dead shrimp in my hand and understood something the 8 billion people bragging in chat did not. They had been handed the whole size of their luck on the first day, the entire lake spread out in front of them to spend down. I had been handed a hole that paid me back a little more every time I risked something for it. One of those runs dry. The other one does not, as long as you keep going down. I had a feeling that mattered more than anything in my starter pack. By the time the sun had moved off noon, the lake market channel was open and loud, most of it lake owners dumping fish in bulk. The price of a common trout already sliding as 10,000 people tried to sell the same thing. I did not have fish to sell. I had ugly material, which turned out to be the one corner of the market nobody with a lake had bothered to learn. I sold the oilfish skin, the little sack of oil, and a handful of shell scraps off the puddle's rim to a crafter who needed grease for a lamp. The coins were almost nothing. I turned them straight around for a bundle of dry grass and a length of rough rope, because grass and rope were what a shelter was made of, and I would rather hold the makings of a wall than a few coins I could not eat. Then I baited the hook again and went down after the thing with the hum. The forecast sharpened the moment I committed to it, the hum taking on a name. Black mud eel. The warning under it was not subtle. Danger, high, reward. Better than anything you have touched. I tied the rope from my waist to the only solid thing within reach, a half-buried rock at the puddle's edge, and I knotted it 3 times and pulled it twice to be sure. An eel that can drag will drag, and I was not going into that mud after it. It hit the bait hard enough to bend the rod double, and for a long second I was sure the line was gone and the eel with it. The thin line sang and held by some miracle the gacha did not deserve. I gave ground when it pulled, and took it back when it tired, the rope at my waist holding me out of the water, and the eel came up out of the brown thrashing, longer than my arm, black, slick, and far stronger than a thing that size had any right to be. It threw a loop of itself over my wrist and bit down, and the pain ran white all the way to my elbow. I had never been in a fight in my life. I had ducked one drunk on a train platform once and called it a close call, so I did not try to wrestle it because the eel was better at being an eel than I would ever be at fighting one. What I had was the rock, and a reed I had sharpened to a point while the oilfish cooked. I let the eel pull toward the stone, let it think it was getting free, and the half-second its head pinned against the rock I got my weight over it, and drove the reed in behind its skull, and leaned until the thrashing stopped. It shuddered once and went still. My hand was bleeding through 3 fingers, and would not stop shaking, and I sat back in the mud and breathed until it did, because there was nobody coming across 1,000 acres to do it for me. The loot opened over the body 1 line at a time, and I felt each one land. Eel meat, a good amount of it. A small monster core warmed through the light that held it. A fragment of depthstone. A pouch of eel oil. Strips of tough hide. The core was the prize. When I closed my hand around it, the system asked whether I wanted to feed it to the source, and I did. The puddle dropped open beneath the surface. Not wider, deeper, a real step this time, the black at the bottom going blacker. The hide I wrapped around my bitten hand and tied off with a strip of itself, and the pressure slowed the bleeding to nothing. The meat I kept. The oilfish had already taught me what careful hunger tasted like, and I was not going to eat my best food cold and raw on the first day if I could help it. That was the first thing the grassland taught me, and it taught me through the hand. Danger was not a thing to run from out here. Danger was inventory. The shrimp were free and worthless. The thing that bit me had paid for a day of food, a step of depth, and the wrap keeping my hand from going bad. Every cast after that, I would be choosing which danger I could afford. The forecast had been showing me something under the eel the whole time, lower, with hard square edges no fish has. I cast for it, and the system named it before it broke the surface. Wooden blueprint chest. Guarded. The guard was a chest crab, pale and hard-shelled, the size of 2 fists, planted on the lid. I did not have a weapon worth the name. What I had was the reed, the rope, and the knowledge that a crab thinks with its claws and nothing else above them. I dangled a scrap of eel meat off to one side, and when both claws snapped shut on it, I flipped the crab onto its back with the reed, and held it there until it went still. A little crab meat, the shell, which I kept, because I had a feeling shell was going to matter before long, and the chest. Inside was a blueprint, rolled tight and glowing faint. Small tent. I learned the next rule of this world the only way I learn anything, by needing it. You could not just build out here. Wanting a tent did nothing. The system would not let my hands put together a real shelter without the blueprint to read from, and the right materials to feed it, and the small tent wanted grass bundles, fish skin rope, and wood stakes. The dry grass I had bought, the rope, and a handful of stakes I cut and sharpened from the dead stalks behind the puddle. I fed it all in, and watched the tent take shape in front of me. Low, ugly, and mine, the first thing in this whole world with walls. The sky was bruising toward evening by the time I tied the last corner down, and the cold was already starting to come up out of the ground. The system had warned all of us, in the welcome, that the first night would come for anyone without shelter, fire, and clean water, and it did not sound like the kind of system that bluffed. I had a shelter now, 2 bottles of water, an eel's worth of meat. What I did not have was fire, or any way to make the brown water safe to drink. So I was 2/3 of the way to surviving my own first night, which, for a man ranked dead last out of every human alive, was further than the chat would have bet on me. I sat in the mouth of the tent as the light went orange, and took stock the way I always did when a month was running short. 2 bottles of clean water and a whole puddle of brown beside me I could not drink. Eel meat, raw. Bread I was saving, a rod I did not trust, a reed, a rope, a thorn, a pile of shell. It was not much, but I had walked into the old world at the end of every month with thinner margins than this, and made it to the next paycheck, and the only thing that had really changed was that the rent out here got paid and nights survived. I could count nights. Counting was the thing I was good at. Then the scammer found me, because the worst people in any new world go to work faster than the good ones. He came in through the market channel, friendly, and the friendly ones are always the ones to watch. A private message, my name spelled right, a little too much warmth packed into it. He had seen I was new, he said. He hated to watch a solo owner go under on the first night. And as it happened, he had a spare blueprint, a rare one, a deep water lure that would let even a small source pull premium fish. Because he liked the look of me, he would let it go cheap. All my coins and the eel meat. A steal, he said. For me. A year ago, some version of me might have wanted to believe a stranger was being kind. 3 years of counting other people's generosity had cured me of that. Generosity with a price on it is not generosity, it is a sale. And the harder a man works to make you feel chosen, the tighter you should hold what is yours. So I asked him to list the blueprint on the open market instead of selling it to me in private, just to keep it clean. He had a reason that was not a reason. Then I asked for its trade record because every item in this world carried a chain of where it had been and what it really was, and the system would show that chain to any buyer who knew to ask. He had a reason for that too, softer this time, and then his voice went hard. When the soft did not work, he went loud. He took the whole thing to the regional chat and turned the story inside out so fast it would have impressed me if it had not been aimed at my throat. Now I was the problem. A dead last puddle owner, hoarding his catch while better people struggled, too proud and too selfish to share with a region that was somehow in his telling, counting on me. He was good at it. The chat began to turn, a few voices agreeing that the worm farmer should share, asking who rank 8 billion thought he was. I pulled the trade record on his blueprint myself, and posted it where the noise was loudest. The system does not lie about where a thing came from. The record showed his rare deep water lure for exactly what it was, a common starter blueprint that he had copied and dressed up, its real origin stamped at the bottom of the chain, the forged value sitting on a worthless base for anyone to read. I did not add anything to it. I did not need to. I let the record sit under his speech about generosity, and the same crowd that had been ready to shame me read the proof and turned on him instead, because a crowd will always rather laugh at a caught liar than look at itself. He went quiet, then he went offline. A while later, the system noted, with no feeling in it at all, that his source had been claimed by someone else while he was busy. I did not feel good about that exactly. A claimed source on the first day meant a person out on the grass somewhere with nothing left and a cold night coming for them. But he had tried to take my food by convincing a whole region I was the thief, and I had spent too many years being the one who paid for other people's stories to lose sleep over a man who picked the wrong target. He had spent the first day of a survival migration running a con instead of fishing, and the night had come for him early. I never saw his name again, and I did not go looking for it. I came out of the whole thing richer than I went in, and not only in coins. 2 strangers who had watched it happen sent me messages, not to mock me, to trade real offers from people who had decided the Puddle Boy could at least read a contract. One of them was about to matter more than either of us knew. Her handle on the market channel was plain, no boast anywhere in it, which was its own kind of signal in a place where everyone was inflating themselves by the hour. Kwan So-hee. She did not open with sympathy, she opened with a correction. My bait was wrong, she said. Not bad luck. Wrong. I was dropping gray starter paste into a depth spring and wondering why only the cheapest things came up to meet it. She knew bait, the whole of it. What grassworm and shrimp smell and fish oil did when you ground them together in the right amounts. What each mix called up out of the water and what it left down there. She was not offering charity. She wanted clean materials in return, and she stayed wary through the whole exchange, careful in a way that told me someone had already tried to cheat her once that day, and she was not going to allow a second. I could have haggled. I did not, because she was right, and because a person who leads with the truth when a lie would have sold better is worth more than the few coins haggling would save. I sent her shell scraps and a measure of eel oil, and I sent fair weight, a little more than the recipe was strictly worth, because I had a feeling I would want to deal with her again, and the cheapest thing a man can buy is someone's willingness to trade with him twice. She sent back the recipe for a paste that smelled, faintly and horribly, of wounded mud shrimp, the kind of smell that makes a bigger thing think it has found an easy meal. I mixed it, baited the crooked hook, and cast where the forecast showed a hard square edge sitting just under the water the eel had come from. The bait worked on the first pull, exactly as she had said it would, the line going heavy with intent. Another chest came up out of the dark, this one bound in a knot of crab legs, and the forecast read a blueprint folded inside it. And the moment it broke the surface, the cold arrived. Not the slow cold of evening that had been creeping up since I built the tent. This was a drop, fast and hard, the warmth pulled out of the air all at once, and a warning opened across the whole region in pale letters that every survivor on every plot would be reading at the same second I was. First cold rainstorm incoming. Exposed survivors will not last the night. I turned the crab leg chest over in my hands. Through the wet shell I could already make out the shape of the word on the blueprint folded inside. And of everything the system could have handed me one breath before a freezing storm, it had handed me the one thing I needed most. Bonfire. The first night of the new world was coming down on 1,000 acres of open grass, and for the first time since I read the number next to my name, I was almost ready for it. I have never been so glad to hold a blueprint in my life. The chest was still bound in a knot of crab legs, and the legs still had a crab attached to them, bigger and angrier than the little guard on the first chest. I killed it patiently, the method that had worked on the first one, because I was not about to throw out a working method just to feel brave and lose fingers proving it. A scrap of meat off to the side, both claws committed to it, a flip onto the back with the reed, and done. Then I had the chest open and the blueprint in my hands, and through the last of the daylight I read what the system had handed me one breath before a freezing storm. Bonfire. Dry grass, stones, fish oil, a spark stone. I had been saving dry grass since the first hour, hoarding it against exactly the cold that was now coming down out of the sky, and I had eel oil in a pouch, and stones at the puddle's rim and the spark stone the starter pack had buried at the bottom of its kit. I built the fire fast, with the rain already starting to spit, and I fed it the eel oil to make it catch in the wet. The first warmth of the new world hit me at the same moment the first hard rain did, and I sat in the mouth of my ugly tent with the fire in front of me and let myself believe, for about 10 seconds, that I might live through the night. Then I got back to work, because 10 seconds is all that kind of feeling is worth. The rain came down exactly as the system had promised, hard, cold, and steady, and it kept coming. Across the grass it turned everything to mud, and through the chat I could hear it doing worse than that to people who had spent the first day bragging instead of building. A wide, clean lake is a beautiful thing right up until a freezing rain is falling on it, and you have no walls, no fire, and a long open shore for the cold to come at you from every side. The bragging in the channel stopped within the hour. What replaced it was people understanding, all at once and far too late, that a water source is not a house. I had a house, more or less. The tent held, the fire held, banked low under the overhang of the tent cloth where the rain could not drown it. And the rain itself, which was killing people out on the open plots, I turned into the one thing my puddle could not give me. I strung the spare tent cloth to catch the runoff, and funneled it down into my 2 empty bottles, and then into the cracked pot once I had traded for it, because clean water falling out of the sky for free was not a thing I was going to let run off into the mud. By the time the worst of the night had passed, I had more clean water than I had started the day with, and I had not had to drink a mouthful of the brown. I dried the crab shell at the fire until it went hard, turning it so it cured even, and then I settled in to outlast the dark. I did not sleep much. I had no business sleeping on the first night of a world that had already told me it meant to kill me. The rain found every gap it could. Twice the wind drove it under the overhang and nearly took the fire, and twice I shielded the flame with my own body in the tent cloth and coaxed it back, because letting it die meant starting the whole fight over with wet hands in a colder pond. Out in the channels I could hear the night doing its work. The loud voices thinned one after another, a few of them asking the open chat for help that nobody out on the open grass was in any position to give. I did not answer. There was nothing I could send across 1,000 acres in a freezing rain, and if I burned myself out trying to save people I could not reach, I would only add my own name to the list of the lost. So I fed the fire, and I watched the water climb at the puddle's edge, and I counted what I had against what the morning was going to ask of me. By the time the worst of it passed, I was still cold, still tired, and still alive, which was 3 more than a lot of people with bigger water could say. The market told me what the storm was worth before the storm was even over. Fire was the whole game now. Every channel was full of people who would have laughed at a bonfire blueprint the day before, and were now offering real value for any way to get warm and stay warm through a cold rain with no shelter. I had the blueprint. I did not sell many copies of it. I was not about to flood the market with the only thing keeping me special, since I had already watched the price of common fish fall through the floor, because 8 billion people all had the same thing to sell. I was not going to do that to fire. I sold a few copies, high, and then I stopped, and I sold the rest of it in pieces instead. Fire starting packets, a measure of eel oil that would make wet grass catch, plain advice on how to keep a flame alive in a downpour, which most of them needed more than any blueprint. And I took goods for it, not coins, because in the middle of a storm, a cracked pot is worth more than a pocket of currency you cannot spend until the rain stops. By the time the sky started to gray, I had turned a single fire into a real pile of things I had not owned the day before. A sack of charcoal, the cracked pot, a leaking bucket I could patch, a bundle of weed fiber, shells, every piece of it a tool, or the start of one, and all of it bought with a warmth I could make again tomorrow for nothing. One trade stuck with me. A lake owner 3 plots over, soaked and shaking so hard it came through in his messages, broken and half-spelled, offered me a whole crate of fresh fish for a single fire packet, and the advice to go with it. A day earlier, that crate would have been a fortune. That night it was nothing, because everyone had fish, and the price had already drowned, and he knew it, and he offered it anyway because fish does not keep a man warm. I did not take the crate. I took his spare bucket and a coil of good rope instead, things I could actually use, and I sent him the packet and told him plainly how to bank a fire so the rain could not reach it. He lived. He thanked me 2 days later, after he had stopped shaking. I did not need the thanks, but I marked him down as someone who had paid fair and remembered a kindness. And out here, that is worth keeping track of. I was still ranked dead last. The list had not moved a single place, but I had started the storm with a tent and an eel, and ended it with the makings of a workshop, and the people still laughing at the worm farmer were the same people who had spent that night losing everything they had bragged about. The puddle had been drinking the storm too. All that rain, all that runoff, all the cores and the catches I had fed it the day before, and somewhere in the gray of the morning the water at my feet crossed the line it had been climbing toward. It rose and darkened, and the mud thinned, and the floor of it dropped, and the system wrote a new name over it in pale light. Muddy Puddle Upgraded. Small mud pond. It was still not a lake. Next to the things people had bragged about in chat, it was still a joke. A small dark pool behind a broken patch of grass. But it was a deeper joke than it had been, and the moment it settled into its new shape, something in me settled with it. A sense I had not had before. The system named it as it woke. Depth sense. I could feel into the water now instead of guessing at it. Where catch forecast told me what might bite before I cast, depth sense let me reach down into what was already there. The shape of the bottom, the things resting on it. The places a thing was soft. The first time I used it on purpose, I knelt at the rim and pushed the sense down into the dark, and the pond opened up in my head without my eyes doing any of the work. I could feel the new floor the upgrade had dropped, the cold pockets where the water went deep, the slow shapes resting on the bottom. It was not sight, and it was not guessing. It was knowing, the same certain knowing I had about the coins in my own pocket. And down on that new layer, under everything else, the sense found a fish with a broad, flat shell across its back, and pinned in the mud beneath that shell, square-edged, another blueprint. The sense gave me one more thing besides, and it would keep giving me that thing from then on. It showed me the weak place. Not the armored back. The soft seam underneath, where the shell met the body, the one spot a spear could go in. I did not rush it. I had a fire, a tent, food, and a storm still doing my fishing pressure for me. So I spent the gray morning making myself harder to hurt before I went after a thing armored on every side. The hard crab shell I had cured at the fire became guards, lashed up above forearms with the weed fiber I had traded for. The eel hide made wraps for my hands that did more than stop bleeding now. They gave me grip on a wet line and a wet spear, and I cut a longer, heavier reed than the one I had killed the eel with, and worked the end of it to a point. A spear I could put my whole weight behind. Then I mixed a batch of Soe's paste, the wounded shrimp smell she had sent me, because a shell-backed fish that size was slow and stubborn, and exactly the kind of thing that smell was built to call up out of the dark. It came up slow, the shell breaking the surface first, broad, flat, and streaming mud. I hooked it on the crooked gotcha rod, which was barely enough to turn it, and I did not try to fight the shell, because depth sense had already told me there was no winning a fight against the shell. My first lunge with the spear glanced off the plates and nearly cost me the weapon, and the fish slammed sideways hard enough to jerk me off balance into the shallows. I caught myself on the rim and backed off. Trying to force it was the eel all over again, the same mistake I had bled 3 fingers to learn, and I was not going to learn it twice. So I let it heave, roll, and tire itself on the line. And I waited. A thing with armor like that has to open somewhere to move. When it humped its back to turn, the seam showed exactly where the sense had said it would, the soft line under the shell where it met the body, and I drove the spear up into that seam and put every bit of weight I had down onto it, and held it there until it stopped moving. No wrestling, no heroics. The weak place, and patience, which were turning out to be the only kind of strength a man like me was ever going to get out here. The loot rose off at one line at a time, The water filter blueprint, the thing I had spent the whole day needing. A stack of shell plates heavier and better than the crab shell, straight onto my pile of armor materials. A handful of fine lake sand, a small clear pebble the system marked as valuable and did not explain, and 8 lake coins, the most money I had held at one time since the world began. I sat back on my heels in the mud, soaked through, my arms shaking again, and for the second time in 2 days I had taken something dangerous and turned it into exactly what I needed next. I was starting to understand the shape of how a man wins out here without ever being the strongest thing in the water. Before I touched the filter, I dealt with the food, because a hungry man makes poor trades and I had an eel's worth of meat that would not keep raw. I built a low rack of green reed over the edge of the fire and smoked the eel strips slow through the gray morning, turning them, letting the heat and the smoke do what the cold could not, and make the meat last. It filled the camp with a smell that was almost good, the first almost good thing the grassland had given me. And it left me with something better than a meal. It left me with stock. Dried, smoked, keeping food, in a world where most people were eating their catch the same day they pulled it because they had no way to hold it. I ate 2 strips, saved the rest, and understood I had just stumbled onto the other half of what I was going to sell. The water filter wanted lake sand, shells, grass cloth, and charcoal, and I had every piece of it now, the charcoal out of the storm trades. I built it under the lip of the tent, out of the rain, and I poured the brown water of my own pond through it. What came out the bottom ran clear. I cupped it in my hands and drank. And after 2 days of rationing, 2 bottles water I could now make as much of as I wanted, was the best thing I had tasted since the train. And that was when the second thing this world had to teach me landed, and I worked it out before the system ever spelled it for me. Everyone was selling fish. 8 billion people with lakes, all dumping the same trout into the same market, all racing each other down to nothing on price, because when everybody has the identical thing, the thing is worth identical to nothing. And not one of them was selling water. They all had water, oceans of it, so it never once crossed their minds that clean, filtered, safe-to-drink water might be the thing people could not get the moment a cold storm churned every open source to mud and sickness. Fish was food. Water was life. And life, it turns out, sells higher than food. Nobody had built a single thing to sell water, because nobody had ever had to think of water as something you could run out of. I had thought about running out of everything my whole life. It was the one subject I had a head start in, so I stayed out of the fish war entirely. I sold filtered water in small clay pot measures, and I bundled it with strips of smoked eel, survival in a single trade, and I priced it fair but never cheap. And the thing that made it work, the thing that kept it working, was that when buyers ran a scan over me to size up who they were dealing with, since every survivor could scan another, my own catch appraisal lied for me. It masked the real depth of my pond. It hid how much I was actually pulling up and how fast. It kept my climb off the public read entirely. To every scan that reached me, I was still rank 8 billion. Still the worm farmer, a dead last Puddle owner who had gotten lucky with a fire blueprint and stumbled into a little clean water to sell. Nobody guards what is theirs against the man they are busy laughing at. My first real water sale taught me how right I was. A survivor 2 regions out, a lake owner, sent for a single measure almost as a joke, half expecting the worm farmer's water to be the poison Teo kept calling it. I sent it clean. An hour later, the message came back changed. No joke left in it, asking how much I had and what I wanted for a standing order, because his own lake had gone foul in the storm, and every scan he ran on it came back worse by the hour. I had what he could not get from a source 100 times the size of mine. I named a fair price and a steady one, and I had my first regular buyer before the mud on the grass had even dried. After that, they came faster than I could have hoped, and I never once had to chase the fish price down into the dirt to find them. It killed the last of the scammer too, without my lifting a finger. There had been a few voices left in the regional chat, still clinging to his version of me, the proud Puddle boy hoarding what the region needed, and the moment my filtered water came up verified clean, and the people who bought it did not get sick, that story had nowhere left to stand. You cannot call a man a fraud while he is the one selling you the water that keeps your own source from poisoning you. The doubt died quiet, and I let it. That is when the man with the biggest lake in the region decided to come down and step on me himself. His name was Kang Teo, and he made very sure everyone knew it. His source was not a lake so much as a small sea, and through the chat I could see what he had already built on it. Docks running out across the water. Nets, a whole crew of other survivors working it for him. Storage sheds going up along the shore. He controlled the price of common fish for the entire region, because he could outsupply anyone alive, and he had noticed the worm farmer making noise in his market, and decided to put a stop to it. So he did what his kind of supply always lets them do. He mocked me first, in chat for the crowd, called my whole territory a stain on the region, and my water a sickness waiting to happen, picking the cursed water story back up where the scammer had dropped it. And then he flooded the channel with so much cheap common fish that the price fell straight through the floor, trying to drown my small trade under the sheer weight of his. It did not touch me. He could not have known why, because his scan read the same worm farmer everyone else's did. But the reason was simple. I was not selling fish. I was selling fire and clean water, and the dried food that storm-soaked lake owners suddenly could not do without. and you cannot crash the price of a thing by flooding the market with a completely different thing. He worked that out a few hours too late, his crew going quiet in the trade records as the day wore on, and I filed his name away beside the eel in the storm. Another danger with a cost and a payout attached to it. I did not know the size of it yet, but he had built his whole power on being the biggest, and he was not going to take it well. The morning the market started to prove there were things he could not outsupply. So he watched the whole thing from wherever she was, and somewhere in the middle of it her messages changed too. She had started out wary, selling me a recipe and keeping one hand on her coin. Now she was sending me bait built for specific fish before I asked for it, reading my catches off the market, and working out what my pond was growing into faster than I had said a word about it. She was the only person in the region who had looked at the worm farmer's trades and seen the truth underneath them, that there was nothing lucky about any of it. She did not say so out loud. She started treating me as a partner worth keeping instead of a mark worth a single sale, and I started sending her clean materials and fair weight in return, and a thing that had begun as one cautious trade settled into something steadier. Out here, that mattered. A man alone on 1,000 acres needs exactly one person he can deal with straight, and she was turning out to be mine. The storm broke near the end of the day, the rain thinning to nothing and the gray pulling back off the grass, and I went down for one more cast before the light went. The forecast showed me a weedfish in the new layer, all teeth and temper, and it fought me dirty, biting the line and spinning the hook 3 separate times before I finally landed it. When it came up, it was already dying, and as it died, it coughed something up into the mud at the pond's edge. A scrap of blueprint, torn, only a piece of a hole. I picked it up and read what I could of it. Drying rack. Just a fragment, a corner of the design, the rest of it gone. And I felt the rest of it pull at me from somewhere lower, from down in the dark where the water had gone deepest. I looked into the pond, down through the clear my filter had not even touched yet, and at the very bottom, where the storm had stirred something loose, there was a ring. A circle of black set into the floor of my own pond, darker than the water around it, with a cold coming up out of it that the fire at my back could not reach. The weedfish gave one last kick, slid out of my hands, and dove straight down through that black ring, taking the rest of itself into the dark. I sat on the rim of the small mud pond with a fragment of a blueprint in my hand, and a hole in the bottom of my own water that had not been there an hour before. A drying rack, in pieces, and the rest of it down a black ring that breathed cold into a pond I had only just learned to read. The system had spent 2 days teaching me the same lesson over and over, through the eel and the shell-backed fish, and the storm. Everything worth having down here was guarded, and everything guarded paid out for the man patient enough to find the soft place and wait. I had a fire now, clean water, smoked food, a rival who had already underestimated me once, and a torn blueprint pulling me toward a hole in the dark. The puddle was not finished opening. It had only just started, and in the morning, I was going down to see how far. I went down for the weedfish first thing in the morning, because a hole in the bottom of my pond would still be there at noon, and a torn blueprint would not finish itself. I had slept maybe 3 hours with the black ring at the bottom of my pond pulling at the back of my mind the whole time, and I woke before the light was full and went straight to the water. The grassland was quiet again, the storm 2 days gone, the mud drying to cracked gray across the open plots. My camp had held through all of it. Now it was time to find out what the hole in my own floor was hiding. The weedfish in the new layer were fast and mean, and they bit for the joy of biting. The first one took my bait and spat the hook before I could set it. The second shook loose halfway up and dove. The third I hooked clean through the side of the jaw, and I did not give it a finger of slack the whole way up. And when it landed, it brought the rest of what I needed with it. The torn drying rack fragment in my pack pulled toward the new piece the moment they were close, and the 2 halves of the blueprint became one whole. Drying rack, reed frame, fish skin cord, charcoal bed. I had been smoking eel on a sad little rack of green reeds since the storm, and it had worked, but the real thing was a different animal. I built it tall, 3 levels of frame lashed with fish skin cord over a bed of the charcoal I had traded for. And once it was up, I went to work on everything I had been saving. The rest of the eel, the crab meat, the shell-backed fish, which was a lot of meat once you got past the armor. I cut it into strips and laid it across the frame and smoked it low and slow through the morning, turning it, feeding the charcoal, and by the time the sun was high, I had something almost nobody else in the region had. Food that kept. That is a small, flat sentence that means nothing until you understand what everyone else was doing. 8 billion people pulling fish out of the water and eating it the same day, because a fish left out goes bad, and a lake gives you no way to hold what it gives you. They were rich in the moment and poor by morning every single day, starting over with every sunrise. I had a wall of smoked, dried keeping meat, stacked and counted, that would feed me for days without my casting a line. In a survival migration, I would stay strong as long as I had eaten, while the hungry ones around me made the mistakes, and I had just bought myself a long stretch of never being the hungry one. I counted the hoard in days, because days are the only unit that has ever made sense to me. So many strips of eel, so many of crab, so many of the shell-backed fish, and against them, so many days I could go without touching the water if a storm came, or a fight, or a stretch where the pond needed to rest and deepen instead of being fished. That number, Days of food in hand was the first real cushion I had owned since the train, and with a cushion behind me, I could make different choices than I had ever made one bad day from nothing. I had spent my whole old life scraping along with nothing in reserve. Out here I was quietly building the reserve first. So he reached me through the market while the smoke was still going, and she had a recipe she thought I would want. Grasshopper bait. Dryland bait she called it, brown grasshopper and grass oil. Not for the shallow, ugly things I had been pulling, but for the faster, smarter fish that lived in deeper, cleaner water. She had worked out what my pond was becoming before I told her a thing about it, just from reading my trades. She was right again. She kept being right about water she had never seen. She wanted clean water for the recipe, a standing measure, and she wanted something I had not expected: shelter. Her own plot caught the rain badly, she said, plainly, no shame in it, and the cold storms were costing her. She wanted to know how I had kept a fire alive through the worst night the grassland had thrown so far, and she wanted the design of a tent that would not drown. I sent her the water, and I sent her more than the recipe was worth, because I had decided 2 days ago that she was the one person out here I would deal with straight. And then I sent her the rest for free. How to bank a fire under an overhang so the rain could not reach it. How to string cloth to catch the runoff instead of letting it flood the camp. The tent design, the real one, the same shelter that had kept me alive. She had been straight with me since her first message, when a crooked word would have made her more, and a person like that does not get charged for shelter by me. I tried the grasshopper bait that same hour, out of curiosity more than need, casting it into the cleaner water near the surface where the faster fish had started to show since the upgrade. It pulled up a long silver fish I had not seen before. Quick, clean, worth real coin, nothing like the mud-bound ugly things the gray starter paste had been bringing me. She had been right about that too. Every recipe she sent reached a little deeper or a little cleaner than the last. She was guiding my pond up one run at a time from a plot she had never set foot on, and the longer we traded, the more I understood that bait was not a small skill. In a world where the water decided everything, the person who knew what to drop into it was worth more than most people with lakes. She went quiet for a while after that, and when she came back her thanks were short, and under the short words was something steadier than thanks. Trust does not get built out here by people saying they trust you. It gets built by a fair trade, then another, then the day one of you sends help with no price on it, and the other one remembers. We were 3 trades in now, and not one of them had gone wrong. That counts for more than any words, on 1,000 acres where most voices in the chat are working an angle. With food stored in the grasshopper bait in hand, I finally did the thing the black ring had been waiting on. I had been holding my lake coins, all of them, because I had a feeling the pond was close to another step, and I wanted to push it over the edge on my own terms instead of waiting for the slow drip of catches to do it. The system had taught me how upgrades worked by now. You could let a source climb on its own, one catch at a time, or you could force it, feed it coins and the right materials all at once, and make the jump happen when you chose. I ground the deathstone fragments into powder, gathered the shells and the fish oil, counted out the coins and fed the whole lot into the pond together. The water answered. It pulled down and cleared, the last of the mud thinning out of it until I could see straight to the bottom, and the system wrote the new name in pale light. Small mud pond upgraded. Clear pond. For the first time, I could kneel at the rim and see my own water all the way down. Clear, cold, deep, the brown, sour puddle of the first day gone entirely. It did not look like much to anyone scanning it from 1,000 acres away, and the chat still had me dead last. But I knew what I was looking at now. Not a small pond. A deep one, getting deeper, with the whole of whatever the system was hiding stacked underneath it, waiting to be earned. And the black ring at the bottom, the cold dark circle the weedfish had dived through, changed with the upgrade. It had been a hole before. A drop into nothing, the kind of thing a smart man does not lower himself into without knowing whether there is a floor. Now it's set, steadied, opened into something the system was willing to name, a stairway of dark going down, with a way in and, more important to me, a way back. Level 1 Puddle dungeon unlocked. The warning under it was plain. A dungeon could trap a survivor below if his line back failed or his light went out. People had already died in the early ones, the chat said. Gone down and never come up. I was not going to be one of them, but I was also not going to leave a stock dungeon under my own pond unopened. Not when everything this world had built so far had paid out for the man patient enough to go in carefully. So I went in carefully. I roped my waist to the buried rock at the rim, the same anchor that had held the eel, and I let the line out slow as I lowered myself into the ring. I took the sealed flame and a fresh skin of lamp oil, because the dungeon had no light of its own, and if my light died down there I would not be coming back up to complain about it. Shell guards up both arms, the reed spear across my back, Soye's grasshopper bait and the crooked rod, which I was about to be very glad to replace. And I counted my line out as I went, so I would know to the arm's length how far I had to climb to reach the sun again. The drop went further than I expected. The light of my own pond shrank to a pale coin above me as I lowered myself, and the water turned from the clean cold of the clear pond to something older and heavier the deeper I went, pressing in, tasting of mud, stone, age. Halfway down, I made myself stop, breathe, check my line, because the thing that kills a man in a place like this is not the monster at the bottom. It is panic. It is going too fast, burning his oil, losing his count, looking up one moment to find the way back to the sun, has gone blank in his head. So I went slow. I checked the rope. I counted. And when my feet finally found something solid, I stood still in the dark with my hand on the line and let myself be sure of the way back before I let myself care about the way forward. The first layer of the dungeon was a drowned room of mud and root. The walls were packed dark earth, and through them ran roots that gave off a faint cold light of their own, enough to see by once my eyes adjusted. Pale, steady, wrong somehow, because roots do not glow and these did. The water down here was still, old, older than the pond above, and it was not empty. Blind fish came at me first, pale and eyeless, hunting by the push of the water alone. They were not strong, but they were many, and if I swatted at all of them at once, I would miss the one that mattered. So I kept my back to a wall, kept my movements small, and let the shell guards take the ones I could not avoid while I worked deeper. They could not see me. They could only feel me, and moving slow and steady, I gave a blind hunter very little to feel. It was slow, ugly work, and it was the kind of work I was built for. No crowd to play to down here, no chat to convince, nobody to mock or be mocked by. Just the cold, the pale glow of roots that should not glow, and me picking my careful path through the dark toward whatever was worth a locked door. I had never felt less afraid of being last. Down here, last did not exist. There was only what you could reach and what you could carry back up. The mud traps were worse, because the mud traps did not announce themselves. Stretches of the floor that looked solid and were not. Soft-sucking pits that would have taken my leg to the hip and held it while the blind fish came to find out what was thrashing. Depth sense earned its place down there. I could feel the soft floor before my foot found it. The same certain knowing that had shown me the seam in the shell-backed fish, and I picked my way across the firm ground between the pits with the sense reaching ahead of every step. And then there were the chest shrimp. I felt them before I saw them. A cluster of small, fast shapes carrying something heavier than themselves. And when the root light caught them, I understood what they were. Shrimp the size of my hand, each one clutching a little lock something scuttling along the base of the far wall toward a crack they meant to vanish into. The system marked one of them, the lead one, the one whose load read heaviest. Chest shrimp, loot carriers. They do not fight, they run, and if they reach their crack they are gone, with whatever they are carrying, and you have lost it. I did not have time to be careful with that one. I had spent 2 days learning patience, and the dungeon was about to teach me that patience has an opposite, and you need both. The marked shrimp broke for the crack the instant my light reached it. Fast, faster than the spear would ever be, and the only thing in my kit quick enough to reach it was the one tool I had been cursing for 2 days. I cast the crooked rod, threw the hook out ahead of the shrimp instead of at it, and let it scuttle straight onto the barb. The bent point that had failed me on 100 easy fish caught one panicking shrimp at exactly the right angle, and I hauled it in before it knew it was hooked. It came up still clutching its prize, and I took both. Past the chest shrimp, set into the far wall where the roots grew thickest, was a door. Not a crack, not a gap in the mud, a door. Wood, banded, with a lock set into it and a frame built square around it, standing at the bottom of a hole under my own pond in a world that was 20-some days old. I put my hand on it and it was real, solid, made, and the cold that came off it had nothing to do with the water. Roots had grown over and through it, holding it shut, and the lock at its center wanted a key I did not have. But the thing the lead chest shrimp had been carrying, the prize still clutched in its claws when I pulled it up, was a piece of one. The system named it as I took it. Root door key fragment. I did not open the door then. My line was long out, my light had burned down past half, and only a fool spends his last oil on a locked door at the bottom of a dungeon when he can climb back to the sun and come again ready. So I cleared what loot the first layer still held, and I climbed, counting my line back an arm's length by arm's length until the cold root light gave way to the light of my own pond and I pulled myself out onto the rim and breathed open air. The dungeon paid out properly once I was up, the rewards coming spaced and earned. A basic fishing rod blueprint, a mud brick recipe, 12 lake coins, more than I had carried since the world began. A whole death stone, not a fragment this time. And the key fragment, sitting cold in my pack. I built the basic rod before I did anything else, and throwing the crooked gotcha rod onto the scrap pile was one of the better moments I had out there. For 2 days that bent, twisted, miserable starter rod had nearly lost me the eel, had barely turned the shell-backed fish, and had only redeemed itself by accident on a fleeing shrimp. The basic rod was nothing special by any real standard. To me, after that rod, it was a king's tool. A straight hook that set when I told it to. A line that would not snap if I breathed near it. I cast it once into the clear pond just to feel it work. And it worked. And I put 2 days of frustration down with that one cast. The mud brick recipe was the other quiet prize. I had been patching a fence of soft mud posts that washed half away every time it rained. Mud bricks fired hard at the bonfire were a wall that lasted. I started making them that afternoon, a stack at a time, because I had a feeling the day was coming when the difference between a soft fence and a hard wall would be the difference between keeping my pond and losing it. By dusk, I had a low course of fired brick laid along the weakest stretch of the fence, hard and solid where the soft mud had been. And standing back to look at it, I could see the shape of what I was building for the first time. Not a campsite anymore, a holding. Walls, fire, clean water, stored food, a rod that worked, and a dungeon under it, all that paid out for patience. None of it would have impressed anyone sitting on a lake. All of it together was worth more than any lake, and I was the only one in the region who could see it, because my own appraisal was making sure of that. I would have missed the next thing entirely if counting were not the one skill I have always been good at. The dried food was selling well, the water better, the bundles of both best of all, and as I worked through the day's trades, I started to notice a pattern in the buyers. The same handful of accounts, new ones, plain ones, buying in steady amounts at steady times, never haggling, never chatting, just taking the food and the clean water and going. Fake names. Anyone can make a fake name out here, but a fake name cannot hide a pattern from someone who reads patterns for a living. And these all bought the same way, moved the same way, and when I traced where the goods were going through the trade records, they were all going to one place. Teo's Lake. The man had stood in the regional chat and called my water a sickness and my territory a stain, and his own crew was buying my dried food and my filtered water under made-up names, because a crew cannot work a giant lake on raw fish and foul water alone. He needed what I was selling. He needed it badly enough to send his people to buy it in secret while he spat on it in public. I did not say a word about it in the chat. A thing like that is worth more held quiet than spent on a cheap shot. I kept selling, kept counting, and filed away the most useful fact I had learned about Kang Teo yet, which was that the biggest man in the region could not feed his own people without me. It told me something about the shape of the fight that was coming too. Teo's whole power was the lake, the size of it, the endless common fish he could pull from it. But a lake is only food and noise, nothing else. And his crew had just proven it by paying a stranger in secret for the two things a lake could not give them. Clean water and food that kept. He was big. He was not stable. And a big thing that is not stable falls harder than a small thing that is. I did not know yet how I would use that. I only knew it was true, and that he did not know I knew it. That night I fit the fragment to the door. I had not meant to do it in the dark, but the key fragment had been pulling at me since I brought it up. A cold, steady tug toward the dungeon below. The camp was banked and the fire was low, and I could not sleep for thinking about a built door at the bottom of a new world. So I roped up and went back down with a full skin of oil and the new rod on my back. The fragment was not a whole key, but the first door did not want a whole key. It wanted enough, and the fragment was enough. I set it into the lock, and the roots that had held the door shut for who knows how long drew back, and the door swung in and the cold behind it rolled out over me, thick and old. The room on the other side was full of fishing rods, broken ones, snapped shafts and bent hooks and rotted line, dozens of them, piled and scattered across the floor of a room that should not have existed. And the moment my light fell on them, I understood what was wrong, in my gut before my head caught up. These rods were old, weathered and worn, the grips rotted soft, the kind of old that takes years. There were no years in this world. The migration was 3 weeks gone. Nothing down here should have been older than I was, and these rods had been broken and left behind long before the system ever pulled me off that train. I crouched and picked one up. The shaft crumbled at the grip where my fingers closed on it, the line gone to powder, the hook eaten through with rust. It had been a good rod once, better than my basic, better maybe than anything I had seen traded in the region. Someone had owned it, and used it, and worn it out, and broken it, in a place the system swore was 3 weeks old. I set it back down with the care a man gives a thing that belongs to the dead, and the cold certainty I had been holding off finally landed. This world was not new. It was only new to us. Something had lived here, and fished here, and the depth my puddle was reaching down into was not empty wilderness. It was a place. A made place, with doors, rooms, the leavings of whoever had built it, drowned and buried under the grass and waiting for 8 billion of us to come dig it back up one hook at a time. The system put one line into the cold dark over the pile, with no feeling in it at all. Warning. Rod eater detected. Something large shifted in the black water at the far end of the room. Slow, heavy, patient, and I felt it turn its attention toward the light, and toward the new rod on my back that I had been so glad to build that afternoon. I held still in the doorway, a room full of dead men's rods between me and whatever was waking up at the back of it, and I understood that the puddle had stopped being only mine. It had a history. The history was still down here, in the dark, and it had heard me come in. I backed out of that doorway slow, and I did not turn my back on the dark until the root door was shut between me and whatever was waking up in it. A smarter version of every survivor who had died in those early dungeons would have done the same. The thing at the back of that room was called a rod eater, and I had exactly one rod worth the name. The basic I had built that afternoon and cast once into the clear pond, and loved more than a grown man should love a fishing rod. Going into a room with a monster that ate rods, carrying my only good one, in the dark half ready, was not courage. It was how I ended up a name in the chat that nobody hears from again. So I climbed back to the surface, banked the fire, slept what little I could, and in the morning, I got ready to do it right. A rod eater eats rods. That was the whole problem. And once I had said it plainly to myself, it was also the whole answer. If the thing wanted to bite metal, I would give it metal to bite that was not my basic rod. I spent the morning building a decoy, a fake rod lashed together from a stripped reed and the bent ruin of my old gotcha hook and a few scraps of the metal-smelling paste I worked up from shell powder, and the last of the spoiled oil, backup hooks, in case. Shell guards up both arms. And the thing I was proudest of, because nobody else in the region could have made it yet, a wedge of fired mud brick I carried down in pieces and built into a choke at the narrow mouth of the rod room, a hard corner I could drive the thing against where it could not turn. I want to be clear that I was not calm about it. A thing that ate metal in the dark had been waiting behind a door under my pond since before the world I knew ended, and I was about to walk into its room on purpose. But fear is just information, and the information was useful. It told me to bring a decoy. It told me to build the wedge. It told me to keep my real rod on my back and out of reach until the last possible moment. If I had felt no fear down there, it would have meant I had not understood where I was standing. I understood it fine. I just did not let it make my choices for me. Then I went in, with the decoy in one hand and the basic rod slung safe across my back, and I let the rod eater smell the bait I wanted it to find. It came up out of the black water at the far end fast for something that big, all jaw and old hunger, and it took the decoy exactly as I had hoped. Its mouth closed on the fake rod and crushed it, the reed and the old hook folding up in teeth that would have done the same to my basic in half a breath. And for one moment it was busy with a meal that was not my livelihood. I drove it toward the brick wedge. It thrashed and tried to turn, and the hard corner would not let it, and I got the reed spear into the soft place under its jaw, and leaned, and it bit down on the spear and nearly took that too, and the fight came down to whether the wedge would hold or my arms would give first. It pushed. I have never felt anything push like that, a slow grinding weight trying to back off the wedge, turn, and bring all of itself around onto me, and all that stood against it was a corner of fired mud, and a man who weighed a fraction of what it did. My boots slid in the muck. The brick groaned. I got my shoulder behind the spear and my feet against the only solid stone I could find, and I stopped thinking about winning and started thinking only about not letting go, because the moment I let go was the moment it turned, and the moment it turned I was finished. The wedge held. My arms nearly did not. It was the eel again and the shell-backed fish again, and every fight I had been in out here, the same lesson written one more time, in a harder hand. I was never going to be the strongest thing in the water. I was only ever going to win by making the water small, by taking away the room a stronger thing needed to use its strength, and then outlasting it in the corner I had built. I pinned the rod eater against the brick until it stopped fighting the spear, and then a while longer to be sure, and when it finally went still I sat down in the cold dark, with my back against the wedge that had just saved my only rod, and let my hands shake themselves out. The room was quiet now except for my own breathing and the drip of cold water off the walls. And in the still root light I could see the old broken rods again, the ones that had been here before any of us, scattered around the body of the thing that had been guarding them. I did not have an answer for them yet, but I had a feeling the rod eater had not been put down here to guard nothing, and a pile of dead men's rods was not nothing, and somewhere under all of it was a reason I was not going to like. The rod eater paid out like nothing I had killed before. Its teeth came off it long, curved harder than any stone I had worked with, a set of spear tips and blades a season ahead of the sharpened reeds I had been making do with, a bundle of what the system called reinforced line weed, a fiber I could spin into line that would not snap when the next big thing hit it, a monster fish core, the biggest yet, warm and heavy in my hand, and three things rolled tight and glowing that mattered more than the meat or the metal, a pond fence blueprint, a grip glove blueprint, and a recipe for raw repair oil. I built all three the moment I was back in the sun, because I was not about to let good blueprints sit in my pack while I rested when I knew exactly what they were for. The repair oil came first. Eel fat rendered down and ground shell powder worked into it, and I rubbed it along the basic rod where the rod eater's near misses had scored it, and the small damage closed and the rod came back to true. That oil was its own kind of freedom. A rod had become a thing I could hold on to through a bad fight and bring back after. It was a thing I could keep mending as long as I had eel fat and shell, and I had plenty of both. The grip gloves went on next, fish skin and shell stitched into a glove that held a wet line and a wet spear without slipping, and after 2 days of losing my grip at the worst moments they were a second pair of hands. And the pond fence I built up out of the mud bricks I had already started stacking, a real wall now around the rim of the clear pond, fired hard and set deep, with the rod eater teeth worked into the top of it pointing out. I took stock that evening and the count had changed past recognizing. 6 days ago I had owned a bent hook, 3 lumps of bait, and a hole full of mud. Now I had a repaired rod I could keep repairing, gloves that held, armor coming together, a wall with teeth, a dungeon that paid, and food enough to skip a week of fishing if I had to. None of it had come from luck. Every single piece of it had come from taking one dangerous thing at a time and refusing to die to it, then turning what it dropped into the next piece. That was the whole method. It was the only method I had. And it was working. I stood back and looked at the fence when it was done, and for the first time my camp had the settled look of a place I meant to hold for good. I did not know yet how soon the fence would be tested, The grassland was about to tell me. It came the first night the fence was up, and it came because my water had gotten too good. That was the part I had not thought through. A clear, clean, cold pond, the only clean water for who knew how many plots in a grassland going dry, does not just draw buyers in the market. It draws everything with a throat. The first night beasts came out of the dark grass after midnight, low, fast, in numbers, pulled across the open plots by the smell of the only good water around, and they came to drink and found a wall and a man between them and it. The fence earned itself in the first 10 minutes. The beasts were strong, stronger than me 1 for 1. Claws, weight, a hunger that did not care what I wanted. But the wall took their charge, and the rod-eater teeth along the top of it turned them, and it funneled them to the one gap I had left, the narrow place where I stood with the spear. A wall does the same thing for a weak man that a dungeon corner does. It takes away the room. It makes the fight happen where I choose it. One beast at a time in a gap barely wide enough for one, instead of all of them on me at once in the open where their numbers and their strength would have ended me in a breath. I held the gap. The grip gloves held my spear. When the blood made everything slick, the shell guards turned the claws I could not dodge, and the rod-eater teeth on my spear went through hide that my old reed points would have skidded off. They kept coming in waves, a lull and then another rush, the smell of the water pulling fresh ones out of the dark long after the first pack should have given up. I lost count of how many times I set my feet in that gap. My arms went past tired into something that just kept moving on its own. Twice a beast got a paw over the wall, and I had to leave the gap to put it down before it dropped inside. And both times I got back to the gap a half second before the next one came through. And a half second was all the room there was between holding the pond and losing it. I do not want to make it sound clean. It was a long, ugly, exhausting night, and I took cuts I would feel for days. But the fire at my back kept me from going blind in the dark, and the fence kept the numbers off me. The long, ugly habit I had built over 4 days, of staying calm, picking the one thing in front of me, dealing with it before I looked at the next, kept me alive when being stronger never could have. By the gray of the morning, the beasts still alive had given up on my water and gone looking for an easier throat to cut, and the ones that had not given up were not going anywhere ever again. They paid for the night too, claw bones hard and useful, a pile of tough hide better than anything I had worked with. I cured the hide at the fire and stitched it into a vest, fish skin and beast hide layered over the chest, with the heavier shell plates set into the forearms, and when I put it on, I was wearing real armor for the first time since the world began, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the system moved a number it had not moved for me before. Survival rank rising, not the source rank. That one the appraisal still held at dead last, still selling the worm farmer story to every scan that reached me, exactly as I wanted it to. But survival rank was a different measure, the system's count of how likely a given survivor was to still be breathing in a week, and mine had spent the whole migration scraping the bottom along with my water. Now it climbed, and it climbed hard, because I had crossed every line the welcome had drawn on the first day. Shelter, fire, clean water, stored food, a rod that worked, and now a wall that had just turned back a night that would have killed most lake owners in the open. I was not surviving anymore. I was dug in. Kang Teo noticed me. I was the small one he had not been able to quite step on, and sooner or later that was always going to catch his eye. His first move was almost polite. A formal offer came through the market. System stamped, real coin behind it, more coin than a Puddle owner ranked dead last had any business being offered. Kang Teo wished to purchase my water source. He framed it as a kindness, a way out for a man clearly in over his head, a fair price for a stain on the region he would be glad to take off my hands. I refused the offer without a word of explanation, because nobody puts real coin on the table for a thing he believes is worthless. And the size of his offer told me more about what my Puddle was worth than any scan ever had. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but he knew enough to want it. And a thing a man like Teo wants that badly is a thing I am going to hold with both hands. He did not take the refusal well. When buying did not work, he went back to the only other tool he had, which was his mouth and the size of the crowd that listened to it. The cursed water story came back, louder this time and organized, his crew echoing it across the channels on cue. The Puddle water was poison. The worm farmer was selling sickness to desperate people. Buy from him, and your own source would foul. It was a good lie, the kind that cost nothing to say and everything to disprove. And in a grassland going dry where everyone was already afraid of their water, it could have killed my whole trade. So I spent the coin I had been saving and bought the one thing that ends a lie like that for good. A market verification token. The system itself tested my water, in the open, where anyone could read the result, and stamped it clean. Not the worm farmer's word, against Teo's. The system's word, which no rumor can shout down. I sold verified clean water after that, and verified dried food, and the rod repair oil that every survivor with a single good rod suddenly understood they needed. All of it stamped true by the only authority in this world that does not lie. The cursed water story did not just fail. It made the people who had repeated it look like fools. And it made me the one honest seller in a market full of noise. And Teo had paid for that result himself. The best part, the part I did not say out loud, was watching it land on him. His whole power was the crowd. the size of the voice he could put behind a story, and I had just shown the whole region that the system stamp beats the biggest voice in the channel every time. He could outshout me, he could not out-truth me, because the truth was on my side and now it had a stamp on it. A few of the survivors his crew had leaned on to spread the rumor quietly started buying my verified water themselves. I sold it to them at the same fair price as everyone else. I am not in the business of punishing people for being afraid. I am in the business of being the one they come back to once they stop. She came out of the grass 2 mornings later, and she was the first living person I had stood in front of since the train. I had heard the system note a survivor crossing into the edge of my plot, and I had the spear in my hand and the fence between us before I saw her, because a stranger walking onto your 1,000 acres in a world like this is not usually good news. But she was not raiders, and she was not Teo's crew come to take what buying could not. She was one woman, alone, moving wrong, favoring one side, and when she got close enough for me to read her, I could see she was hurt, a deep ugly wound along the ribs that someone had given her on purpose. She stopped at the edge of my fence and did not ask for anything. She just looked at the wall, and the fire, and the clear water behind it, and the dried food on the rack, with the flat assessing eyes of a person who had been measuring water sources for a living. It is a strange thing, standing in front of another person after weeks of voices on a screen. I had traded with hundreds of survivors and spoken to none of them, never with a real face, a body, the weight of someone actually there in front of me. For a moment I did not know what to do with it. Then she swayed on her feet and caught herself on a fence post, and the moment passed, because a person about to fall down is a problem with an obvious answer, and I am good at obvious answers. Her name was Osceola, and she had come from Teo's Lake. I could have treated her as the market had taught me to treat everything, as goods, as a thing to bargain with, a wounded scout off my rival's operation worth questioning hard and helping little. A lot of men out here would have. I gave her clean water and dried eel instead, and a place by the fire to sit down before she fell down, and I did not ask her for a thing until she had drunk, eaten, and stopped looking like she might die on my grass. Not because I am soft, because a person is not a fish, and the difference between me and Teo was going to have to be something. And I had decided early it was not going to be that I treated people like inventory. She watched me decide it. She did not miss much, and she did not miss that. She gave me her name and watched my face when she said it, guarding it. She kept her distance even sitting by my fire, kept her back to the fence and her good side toward me. The careful, watchful stillness of someone who had recently learned at the cost of a wound that trusting the wrong person is expensive. I did not push it. I have been the wary one in enough rooms to know you do not earn a careful person's trust by demanding it. You earn it by being, over and over, exactly as safe as you looked in the first minute, until they stop waiting for the catch. So I let her watch. I fed the fire and checked my lines and let her see that the man behind the fence was just a man behind a fence, and slowly the worst of the tension went out of her shoulders. When she was ready, she paid me back in the only thing she had, which was worth more than anything in my packs: information. She had read Water for Teo, scouted sources, mapped the region's wells, until she saw what he meant to do with the map and refused to be part of it. And refusing had earned her the wound along her ribs. The grassland was going dry. A long dry wind was coming. The system had been warning of it under everyone's notice, and the small sources were going to start failing first. And Teo meant to use that. He was not going to wait for the weak ponds to die. He was going to drain them, take their water and their cores for his own lake, while their owners were too desperate and too afraid to stop him, buying their debts and their fear and their water out from under them, one dying source at a time. He had started with the smallest. He would work his way up, and a clear, clean, deep pond that he had already tried to buy and failed to buy was exactly the kind of source a man like that puts near the top of his list. She was not done. When she had told me the worst of it, she got up, against my saying she should rest, and went to the rim of my fence and looked down into the clear pond, and something in her face changed. Her talent was not fishing. It was water itself, the movement of it, where it came from and where it went. Depth sense told me what lived in my water. Her sense told her what the water was doing. And my pond was telling her something it had never thought to tell me, because I had been looking at what was in the water, and she was looking at the water itself. She knelt and put her hand near the surface and went still, tracking a current I could not feel, following it down into one side, to a place along the buried edge of the pond, where the water moved when it had no natural reason to. She told me to dig there, and I did, and a hand's depth down in the cold mud my fingers closed on something that was not stone and was not root. It was a pipe, clay-fired, fitted, a length of made pipe buried in the floor of my own pond, feeding water in from somewhere deeper and further down, pointing the way toward whatever the next upgrade would open. A thing the system had already shown me the shape of and called a deep fishing hole. Water does not flow through clay pipe by accident. Pipe is laid. Pipe is built by hands with intention to move water from a place it is to a place someone wants it. And here it was under my puddle, the same impossible age as the broken rods behind the root door. One more piece of proof of the thing I had been refusing to say plainly since the rod room. Ciola crouched beside me and looked at the pipe for a long time without saying anything. When she finally spoke, it was quiet, and not really to me. She said she had read 100 sources for Teo and felt this same wrong current under a few of the deepest ones, and never understood it, and been told to stop asking. She had thought it was a flaw in her own sense. It was not. It was this buried pipe in the deep sources all through the region, and a man with the biggest lake who had felt it too, and decided the answer was to drain everyone else's before they worked out what they were sitting on. Somebody built this place. The water, the depth, the wells the whole region was drinking from. None of it was wild. All of it was made and drowned and buried under the grass, and the system had dropped 8 billion of us on top of it with hooks in our hands. And I was beginning to think the fishing was the whole point. I sat back on my heels with wet clay on my hands and a buried pipe under my pond, and Osceola watching me understand it. And I knew that the next thing down there, whatever the deep fishing hole turned out to be, was not going to be a fish. The dry wind came early, and it came for everyone at once, and the chat that had spent weeks bragging about lakes went quiet in a new and worse way. Ciola had warned me it was coming. She had not been able to tell me it would come this fast. The system put the notice up across every channel 2 mornings after she dug the pipe out of my pond floor. A long hot wind out of nowhere with no rain behind it, and within a day I could feel it pulling the moisture out of the air and the ground. And the open water, out on the plots, the weak sources started to shrink. Shallow ponds dropped a hand's width, then another. The chat filled up with people watching their water go down and understanding, slow and sick, that a source can die, and that losing your source in a world built on water leaves you with nothing at all. I had been the man with the worst water from the first day, so I had spent the whole migration getting good at not having enough, and the dry wind, which was a death sentence for the careless, was just another lean month for me. I would be lying if I said it was easy to watch. The chat over the next days turned from bragging to bargaining to begging. Lake owners who had laughed at the puddle owner now offering anything for a way to hold water, then offering anything for water itself, then going quiet, which is the worst sound a channel can make. A source dying takes its owner's whole world down with it. I had nearly died of the same thing by inches for 3 weeks, and I knew the shape of that fear from the inside, and knowing it did not give me a single drop to spare. The kindest thing I could do for most of them was survive, sell what little I safely could at a fair price, and not pretend I could save a region 1 bottle at a time. So I worked. I pressed beetle sacks before the sun got high, and the beetles burrowed. I fired brick in the cool of the morning. I checked my water level twice a day against a mark I scratched on the rim, watching the line hold while the whole region's lines fell, and every day it held was a day I had bought with depth nobody else had been willing to dig for. The first thing I did was the thing almost nobody else thought to do. I stopped selling so much water. My filtered water had been my best trade for 2 weeks, the thing that fed me coins while the fish market drowned, and I cut it back hard, down to a trickle, because a pond losing water to a hot wind cannot also lose water to a buyer. The coins hurt to give up. Going thirsty later would hurt more. A source you sell dry in a drought is a source you do not have when the drought gets worse. And I had not climbed out of last place by trading away the thing keeping me alive for a handful of coins I could not drink. Then I went after every drop I could add instead of spend. There were beetles in the dry grass at the edge of my plot. Fat, slow water beetles that carried little sacks of moisture in their bodies against exactly this kind of dry. And I caught them by the handful and pressed the sacks and saved every bead of water they held. I dug clay and fired more mud bricks, because brick holds and brick lasts, and brick was the one building material the dry wind could not touch. And I worked through it all with Ciola at my fire, healing slow, her ribs still wrapped, watching me run my camp with the flat measuring eyes she had walked in with, and saying little, until the day she started to say more. She had spent the first days at my fire saying almost nothing, watching, with the care of a person deciding whether the place they have landed in is safe. Then somewhere in the dry wind work, watching me cut my own water sales to save my source, while every other owner in the chat sold theirs dry in a panic. She started to talk. Small things first. A better way to press the beetle sacks, where the water in my pond was moving and where it had gone still. Then bigger things, the shape of Teo's operation, the names of the sources he had already drained, the order he worked in. She was not announcing anything. It just showed up one day as a person telling me the things she used to keep to herself. And Osceola, who had walked onto my plot guarding her own name, was starting to hand me the map in her head, 1 road at a time. Kang Teo saw the dry wind coming too, and being Teo, he saw it as a chance to squeeze. He did not need wood or charcoal or storage jars. His lake was not going to dry, and his crew had crafted everything they needed weeks ago, so he bought all of it anyway. He used his coin and his crew to corner the market on the materials a small owner needed to survive a drought. The wood for fire, the charcoal for filtering and smoking, the jars for storing water. He bought it out and held it, so that the weak owners watching their ponds shrink could not buy the means to fight back. It was a clean, cruel move. An owner already going dry could not build a filter out of a market with no charcoal left on the shelf. Teo meant for the dry wind to do his draining for him, to kill the small sources first, and soften their owners up, and he was happy to help it along by taking their tools off the shelf before they could reach them. It did not work on me, and the reason it did not work was the reason none of his moves had worked. I was not buying from the market he controlled. I had spent 2 weeks learning to make my own. I did not need his wood. because I had mud brick. His charcoal jars meant nothing to me because I have fish oil and shell powder and a filter built from my own catches. I had clay pipe pieces now and moisture sacks and a hoard of dried food and a deep cold pond the wind had not yet figured out how to reach. Teo had cornered a market I had stopped shopping in a long time ago. The small owners he was strangling had my sympathy. But the man who taught me to need nothing from anyone was 3 years of an old life I would not wish on a soul. And out here it was turning out to be the most valuable thing I owned. The dry wind taught the whole region a lesson my puddle had been trying to teach me since the first day, which was that depth beats width every single time. A wide lake has more water, and it also has more surface for a hot wind to drink from. And the shallow sources were dying first, because shallow is all surface and no deep. My pond was the opposite. Small on top, deep underneath, and getting deeper, with the pipe Ciola had found feeding it from somewhere lower still. So while the lakes around the region shrank at the edges, and the shallow ponds vanished, I did the one thing that would save my source for good. I forced it down again. I poured in everything I had been saving against this exact moment. The coins, the depth stone, the cores, the ground shell, and I made it take the next step. Clear pond upgraded. Deep fishing hole. The change was everything I had hoped for, and a few things I had not. The water dropped, tightened, went cold and still, and the dry wind lost its grip on it, because you cannot evaporate what you cannot reach, and the surface of a deep hole is small and the depth of it is enormous. While the region's water died in the wind, mine settled in and got safer. I had turned the worst source in the migration into one of the only ones a drought could not kill. The chat still had me dead last, and I was starting to enjoy that. It is a strange satisfaction, being the only well in a desert, while the people who mock you watch their oceans turn to mud. I kept it off my face. Crow in a market and your buyers remember you when the wind turns, so I stayed flat and let them think nothing had changed. But somewhere under the work, the part of me that had read rank 8.4 billion next to my name on the first day and set it down without a word, got to quietly pick it back up and look at it again. Dead last. The one source in reach that a drought could not kill. The system could keep its number. I knew what I was sitting on now, and so I was beginning to fear, did Kang Teo. But the upgrade opened more than a deeper, safer pond. The shadows at the bottom went down further than the dungeon I knew, into a dark the root light did not reach, and a new line wrote itself in the cold pale glow over the water. A thing the system had never offered me before. Monster catch mode available. I did not fully understand it until I felt the first one move. The deep fishing hole was big enough now and deep enough to hold things the clear pond never could. And monster catch mode was the system's way of telling me my water had graduated. There were monsters in it now. Boss things, season rank, the kind of catch that paid out a fortune and could kill a careless man in a breath. And the first one announced itself before my gear was anywhere near ready for it, because the dry wind had pushed everything forward, and my fence was the same fence, and my spear was the same spear, and the rod eater fight had left both a little worse for the work. The forecast showed me what was coming and then did something it had never done. It went partly blind, I could read most of it. A grass-jaw catfish, huge, deep, the biggest living thing my pond had ever held, sitting on the new bottom guarding something. But the something it guarded the forecast could not fully read. A locked shape it showed me only in outline. A silver chest the system itself seemed unsure of. I had learned by now that when the system goes quiet about a thing, the thing is important. And a chest the forecast could not read sitting under a monster catfish at the bottom of a made pond was the loudest quiet I had heard yet. Whatever was in it had been put there on purpose. Made and placed, the same as the pipe in the door. But the chest was under the catfish, and the catfish was not going to move. So first I had to take the catfish, and my gear was not ready. I made it ready as fast as I could. I reinforced the basic rod with the rod eater materials and spun the reinforced line weed into a line that could take a real pull. I cut shell boots so the dry mud would not slide me into the water at the wrong moment. I built a proper spear at last. Fishbone and rod eater teeth bound to a heavy shaft, a long way from the sharpened reed I had killed the eel with. And I did not do it alone. So he sent down a fresh batch of her bait, ground to call up something big and hungry, the paste that smelled of wounded mud shrimp, and pulled the biggest things in the water straight to it. And Ciola, who could barely twist at the ribs but could read water sitting still, set herself at the rim to do the one thing I could not do for myself in a fight that size, which was watch the whole pond at once. Then I baited deep and called the grass jaw up. It came up out of the deep, slow and huge, a slab of gray muscle wider than I was tall, with a mouth that could have taken my whole arm and a tail that moved more water in one sweep than my old puddle had ever held. It hit the bait and the line went tight, and the fight was on, and within the first 10 seconds it had done what the night beast could not. It smashed my fence. One roll of its body against the rim, and a whole section of fired brick I had bled to build came apart. The catfish was half out of the water and pulling. The line was screaming, and I felt my shell boots start to slide toward the dark water as the thing tried to drag me in after it. This was the death the dry wind had been pushing me toward, and I had about 1 second to not take it. I anchored. I threw the line around the buried rock that had held everything since the eel, and let the rock take the pull instead of my body, and my boots stopped sliding at the very edge of the water. For a moment it was just the two of us pulling against the rock, the catfish throwing its whole weight into the line into the stone into the ground. I understood that if any one of those three failed, the rock or the line or my footing, the grass jaw would have me in the deep before I drew another breath. The reinforced line we'd held. The catfish whisker would have held better, but I had not spun it yet, and you fight with the gear you finished, not the gear you meant to finish. The line held, and that was the difference between living through the morning and not. The catfish rolled. A thing that size rolls to drown what it is hooked and to break what is holding it, and depth sense felt the roll coming through the line before my eyes could track it. I did the only thing I could. I jammed the broken mud bricks from my own smashed fence into the path of the roll, a wall of rubble against the turning weight, and the catfish rolled into brick instead of into open water, and could not finish the turn. It tried again. It always tries again. A monster that big does not have a plan, it has a body and a hunger, and it kept throwing the same roll and the same pull at me, because they had always worked on everything else it had ever caught. Every roll it spent on my brick was a roll it did not spend killing me, and I let it tire itself stupid against the rubble while I held the line and watched for the only thing I cared about. And then I waited, because the kill was not in the fight. The kill was never in the fight. The kill was in the one moment the thing opened up, and you do not get that moment by being strong. You get it by being patient while a monster tries to kill you, which is the hardest patience there is. Ciola gave me the moment. She was reading the water the whole time, the pressure of it, the gather of the catfish before a move, and she called it before it happened, a warning that the thing was about to lunge open-mouthed to swallow the bait and me with it. Her warning and depth sense landed together. The grass jaw surged, its jaw came open, and for half a breath the whole soft inside of it was exposed, the one place all that gray muscle could not armor. I put the fishbone spear down its open mouth with every bit of weight the anchor had left me, and I held it there while it thrashed the last of the water out of my broken fence, and then it went still and sank back, and the pond was mine again. I sat down in the wreckage of my own wall with my arms dead and my boots full of mud, Ciola breathing hard at the rim from the effort of reading a fight she could not join. For a long moment neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say the dead monster in the water was not already saying for us. She broke the silence first. She said, in the flat way she said everything, that she had watched a lot of strong men fish for Teo, and had never once seen anyone fight like that. Not strong, she said. She was careful to make clear she did not mean strong. She meant that I had taken a thing 10 times my size by making it small, by turning my own broken wall into a trap and waiting for the one breath it opened, and that she had never thought to fish that way because she had never had to. I told her that starting with a puddle, that was the only way I had ever won anything. She looked at the deep cold water that used to be a mud hole, and at the wreckage of the fence, and at me. And I think that was the moment she stopped seeing the worm farmer the chat saw, and started seeing whatever I actually was. The grass jaw paid out the biggest haul I had ever pulled, and the system gave it up spaced and earned, one line at a time. A mountain of grass jaw meat, enough to fill the drying rack 3 times over and feed me for a long, long time. A large monster core, heavier and warmer than the rod eaters, the most concentrated value I had ever held in one hand. 30 lake coins, more than I had earned in the whole migration before it. A length of catfish whisker line, finer and stronger than anything I could spin myself. And 2 things that mattered more than the rest put together. The first was a fragment of a blueprint, and when I read it my breath caught, because it was a piece of a unique fishing rod. Not basic, not reinforced. Unique, a tier I had only seen named in the chat by the handful of survivors lucky or strong enough to reach one. The kind of rod that changes what a man can pull out of the water entirely. Only a fragment, but a fragment of a unique rod is a promise that the rest of it is somewhere close. I sat with that fragment in my hand longer than I should have, with a monster cooling in my pond and a fence in pieces, and watchers I did not yet know about gathering in the grass. A unique rod. The thing the strongest survivors in the region built their whole power around. The rod that turned a good fisher into a great one, and a piece of its blueprint had just come up out of the dead last puddle the chat drew pictures of. I had stopped being surprised by what my water gave back weeks ago. The hunger for it had only grown. The fragment told me the rest was close, and close was all the reason I needed. The second was the chest. The locked silver chest the forecast could not read rose out of the water where the catfish had guarded it. Cold, heavy, sealed. And I put my hands on it and the system told me plainly that I could not open it yet. It wanted a price, not coins. A second monster core, a thing as rare and hard won as the one I had just torn out of the grass jaw, fed to the lock before it would give up what was inside. I had 1 core, the chest wanted 2, and the chest, I was sure, held the rest of the unique rod. So I was rich, and I was stuck, and I was wide open all at once. I had the biggest haul of the migration, and I could not reach the best thing in it, because a second monster core does not come easy in my pond, freshly emptied of its grass jaw, was not going to grow another one overnight. I would have to fish a new monster up out of the deeper dark, with gear now in worse shape than before the fight, to earn the core that opened the chest that held the rod that would make the next monster easier. It was a circle, and I was standing inside it with a smashed fence and a damaged spear and a rod I had reinforced but not replaced. My fence was the worst of it. A whole section of the wall that had turned the night beasts was rubble now. The mud bricks I had jammed into the catfish's roll cracked and scattered. The rod-eater teeth that had crowned it knocked loose in the mud. I had a hole in my defense on the night I most needed it whole, and rebuilding fired brick takes time the dry wind and a circling rival were not going to give me. I started the repairs anyway, because staring at the gap was not going to close it, and Ciola helped where her ribs let her, handing me bricks and reading the pond, and we worked into the dusk against a wall that would not be whole by dark. That was when Ciola went still at the rim, in the middle of handing me a brick, and looked out at the grass. She had the better eyes for distance, and she had spent her whole migration learning to spot Teo's people, and she saw them before I did. Out past the edge of my plot, low in the dry grass where the light was going, there were watchers. Not many. 2, then 3, still impatient, the kind of stillness that is not resting. Teo's men. They were not coming in. They were not trading, or shouting cursed water across the chat, or making any move at all. They were watching, counting, measuring my fence and my pond and my gear the same way I measured everything, learning the shape of what they would have to break. Ciola said it quietly, and she was right. This was not the drain plan yet. This was the look that comes before it. Teo had tried to buy my source and failed, tried to slander it and failed, and now he had seen enough rare drops come up out of my dead last puddle to want it for himself, and he had sent his people to find out what taking it would cost him. They were watching me with a damaged fence and a deep pond full of monsters and a chest I could not open, on the front edge of a drought, and they were doing the math. I did the same math from my side, because counting only my own strength and not theirs was how I would lose. They would not move tonight. 3 watchers do not storm a fenced pond, even a fence with a hole in it, even one held by a man they think is rank 8 billion. They were here to learn, not to take. The taking would come later, with more men, on a night they had picked, once they had measured exactly how thin my wall was, and exactly how tired the dry wind had made me. I had a little time, then, not much. Enough, maybe, to fish a second monster out of the deep, open the chest, build the unique rod, and become a great deal harder to take than the math in their heads currently said I was. I looked back at them across the grass with a brick in my hand, and let them do their counting. I did not hide the gap in my wall, because they had already seen it, and I did not chase them off, because frightened men come back in greater numbers, and patient men should be left to underestimate you. I noted where they stood, the same quiet habit that had caught Teo's buyers and felt out the soft floor of the dungeon, and I went back to laying brick in the failing light. The dry wind pulled at the grass. The watchers held their places, and somewhere under my feet, in the deep cold dark the catfish had come from, a sealed silver chest waited for a second monster I had not caught yet, while the men who meant to take all of it settled into the grass to wait for the night my wall was weakest. I could not wait for the pond to grow me a second monster, so I went down after one, with a smashed fence at my back and Teo's men watching me do it. That was the trap of my whole situation, laid out plain. The silver chest wanted a second monster core before it would open, and the rod that would make every fight after it easier was locked inside, and the only way to earn the core was to fight a monster with the gear I had instead of the gear in the chest. Meanwhile, the watchers sat in the grass and counted, and every hour I spent fishing was an hour my wall stayed broken and my camp stayed an open question they were working out the answer to. I would have liked to wait for the right moment. Trapped where I was, I had to admit the right moment was the only one I would get, so I took it half ready or not at all. So I split myself in 2. Half of me got ready to fish. The other half got ready to be robbed. I had known a raid was coming since Ciola spotted the watchers, and a thing you can see coming is a thing you can prepare for. I built a decoy. A storage box, plain and obvious, set in the mouth of my tent where any thief would look first, and I packed it with nothing worth having. A few common dried fish and some worthless shell scrap, dressed up to pass for a hidden hoard. The real value I buried, scattered in places a raider working fast in the dark would never think to dig. And around the broken section of my fence, the gap they would come through because it was the obvious way in, I started laying the kind of welcome I save for guests I do not like. I will get to what was in it. First I had to earn the rod, and to earn the rod I had to catch the thing in my pond that ate lines for a living. The forecast named it before I cast. Blade fin carp. It was not the biggest thing in the deep, but Death Sense told me it was the meanest. A long lean fish edged with fins hard and sharp enough to part a line without slowing down. That was its whole trick. It did not fight your hook. It cut your hook free and left you holding a slack line in a lighter pack, and if I hooked it the ordinary way I would lose rig after rig to it until I gave up. The pond edge where it swam was a place a careless hand lost fingers to, all those blade fins turning just under the surface, and I had to take it without the catfish whisker line getting sheared on the first run. So he had thought about this before I asked her to. The bait she sent down was not her usual wounded shrimp paste, the kind that drove things into a frenzy. Because a frenzied bladefin carp is a bladefin carp throwing itself at everything, including you. She sent a calmer bait, one that brought the carp in slow and committed instead of fast and slashing, and she told me plainly why. Because she had stopped charging me for the reasons behind her recipes somewhere around the 3rd trade. A slow carp, she said, cuts less and gives you the time to set it up properly. A fast one just bleeds you. Even slow, it sheared my first line in one pass, and I had expected that, and I had planned for it. Here is the thing about a fish that cuts lines. It teaches you not to give it a line you mind losing. So I gave it the one I had been meaning to retire. I rigged the old basic rod, the rod I had loved after the gotcha rod, the rod that had carried me from the eel to the catfish, and I sent it in not to land the carp but to be cut, a sacrifice on purpose. The carp took the bait off the basic rod and sliced the line and turned to run, and in turning it committed itself to a path along the pond edge. And the path along the pond edge was where I had set the rest of the trap. I have loosened 2 fence posts on either side of the gap and driven new ones in close. A narrow channel of brick the carp would have to swim through to reach the deep water it wanted. It went for the channel, fast now, blades out, and the moment its body was between the posts, I drove a 3rd post down behind it, and the carp was pinned in a quarter of brick barely wider than it was. All that cutting edge useless against walls it could not slice through fast enough to matter. It went mad in the channel. It threw itself against the brick on both sides, those fins shrieking against fired clay, cutting grooves into walls that did not cut back. And for a moment I thought the posts would not hold a thing that furious. They held. Brick does not bleed or tire or care how sharp you are, and that was the whole reason I fought everything from behind it. The carp could cut a line, a net, a careless hand, a rope, anything that gave. It could not cut a wall that did not give, and a wall that does not give was the one thing in this world I had learned to make. It did the last thing a cornered blade fin does. It jumped. It came straight up out of the water at me. All those fins fanned and turning, aimed at my throat, because a thing that cannot cut its way forward will try to cut its way through the man who trapped it. The fishskin vest and the shell guards would have taken most of a normal hit. They would not have taken a throatful of blade, so I did not let it reach my throat. I had the fishbone spear set and braced hard, and I met the carp in the air, the spear going in behind the blade fins where depth sense had shown me the body was soft, and its own leap drove it onto the point harder than I could have pushed. For half a second, its whole weight hung on the spear, fins still going, close enough that I felt the wind off them at my jaw, and I held the shaft braced against the brick and let its own fury finish what my arm had started. It came down on the brick between the posts, run through, the blades that had cut a dozen of my lines folding still, and the second monster core was mine. I sat against the fence and looked at the body and the sacrificed basic rod tangled in the cut line beside it, and I felt something I had not expected, which was a little grief over a fishing rod. It was a good rod. It had been the first tool in this world that did what I told it to. I had thrown it into the carp's teeth on purpose to win the thing that would replace it, and that was the right trade, and I was still sorry to lose it. If I felt nothing spending a good tool, I would have forgotten what the tool had cost me, and I had not. I pulled what was left of it from the line, set it aside, and turned to the chest. The second core went into the lock, and the silver chest the forecast had never been able to read finally opened. I had been right about what mattered most in it. A full, unique fishing rod blueprint, the rest of the fragment the Grassjaw had given me, complete now and glowing in my hands. But it was not alone. A storage box blueprint, a real one, far better than the boxes I had been bundling. A rare lake pearl, a thing the system marked at a value higher than anything I had pulled yet. An upgrade for my fishskin vest, plates and patterns to make it armor worth the name. And one item the system framed differently from all the rest, set apart, marked rare and marked dangerous to be seen holding. A Puddle expansion token. I built the unique rod first, because of course I did. I had been fishing this whole world on a bent gacha hook, then a basic rod held together with repair oil, and now I had the real thing in my hands. The unique rod was light and true, and it answered my hand before I finished the thought. The catfish whisker line ran clean off it. The first time I cast it into the monster catch dark of my own pond, I felt it reach deeper and cleaner than anything I had owned. And I understood the fights ahead were going to be a different kind of fight now. Because for the first time, I was not bringing the worst gear to them. I repaired and upgraded the vest next, the new plates over the old, real armor over the patched. I built a couple of the better storage boxes and sold the blueprint copies into a market that had no good storage in a drought, and the coins came in steady on top of everything else. I stood on the rim that evening in real armor, with a unique rod in my hand and a deep cold pond full of monsters in front of me, and I let myself measure how far the count had come. A bent hook and a hole full of mud. 3 weeks ago. Now this. None of it from luck, all of it from the same stubborn arithmetic. Take one dangerous thing, survive it. Turn what it drops into the tool that takes the next one. The rod in my hand was the proof of the whole method, fragment by fragment and core by core, fight after fight, until the worst equipped man in the migration was holding a rod most of the lake owners would never reach. I did not feel safe. I felt ready, which out here is the closest thing there is. So he knew something had changed before I told her. She always did. My trades told her what my pond was becoming before I said a word, and the day after I'd built the unique rod, the things I was buying from her shifted, heavier bait for bigger fish, and she sent the new recipes without a question and added one line of her own, which for her was a speech. She said the worm farmer was about to stop being able to hide, and that when the region finally saw what was in my water, I should remember who had been selling me bait since the second week. I told her I counted everything, and that she was at the top of a very short list of people I trusted out here. It was true. On 1,000 acres of strangers and angles, I had exactly two. A scout healing at my fire and a baitmaker I had never seen. And I was beginning to understand the two of them were a bigger part of how I had survived than any blueprint I had pulled. The expansion token I did not touch. A Puddle expansion token, Ciola told me, looking at it with the flat eyes of someone who had seen what people did to each other over far less, was the kind of thing that got a source taken. It would let me expand my pond, widen it, grow my whole holding in one step instead of grinding upgrades one core at a time. It was enormous value sitting in one small item, and the moment anyone learned I had it, I would stop being a puddle worth assessing and become a prize worth dying over. She had barely finished saying it when she went still and looked out at the grass, and there they were again, more of them this time closer, and the light was going. So I hid the token. It did not go in the decoy box or anywhere else a raider would reach. I buried it deep, alone, in a place I marked only in my own head, and I went back to laying the welcome around the gap in my fence, because the math the Watchers had been doing was finished, and tonight they were coming to check their answer. They came in the dark, fast, quiet, confident, men who expected to rob someone weaker than they were, and meet no real resistance doing it. There were 5 of them, more than the Watchers, which told me Teo had decided the puddle was worth a real crew. They came through the gap in my fence, because the gap was the obvious way and I had let them believe it was the only way, and they moved toward the tent and the decoy box sitting in plain sight in the mouth of it. They smashed the old filter frame on the way, the cracked first frame I had retired when I built a better one, and I let them, because I would only break my own heart trying to save every piece of what I owned. And the filter frame was a piece I had already written off. They grabbed the decoy box, and then the gap in my fence stopped being a way in and became the worst place on my whole plot to be standing. I had spent the afternoon turning that ground into a thing that hurt. Fish oil poured thick across the slope they had to climb, so the first 2 went down hard, slid, and could not get their feet under them. Mud pits under a thin crust of dry dirt, the same soft-sucking traps the dungeon had taught me, so a third man put his leg into the hip and stuck fast and started shouting. Hook lines strung low across the dark where running men do not look, catching shins and wrists. And shell powder, fine and sharp, worked into the oil in the mud, so everything that touched it ground and bit. I did not have to beat 5 men in a fair fight, and I would have lost a fair fight. I gave them a field of my own making in the dark, the same trick as the dungeon corner and the fence channel. In every fight I had one out here, and I picked them off the ground one stuck, sliding bleeding man at a time. It was not a fight so much as a harvest. They had come in fast and confident, and the ground took that away from them in the first 10 steps. A man on his back in fish oil is not a raider. He is a problem trying to stand up. One with his leg in a mud pit is not a threat. He is an anchor. I did not have to be brave or strong against any of them. I had to be the one person on that slope who knew where every trap was and could keep his feet, and I had built the slope, so I was. I went down the line of them in the dark, the fishbone spear doing the work, taking the weapons in the fight out of men who could not get upright to use either. Ciola held the one lamp at the right angle, lighting them and not me, and that was its own kind of weapon. They could not see what was hitting them. They could only see each other going down, and men who came expecting to rob a helpless worm farmer, and found instead a dark full of oil, hooks, pits, and a fishbone spear coming out of the black, did what frightened men always do once an easy robbery turns hard. They broke. 4 of them dragged themselves and each other back out through the gap they had come in, leaving blood and a fake box behind, and the 5th I kept. The one I kept was the one the mud pit had caught, stuck to the hip and going nowhere, and I did not lay a hand on him, because I did not need to. The system has a thing for this. A captured raider can be made to answer through the market, a forced confession logged in the same record that tracks every trade and item, the truth stamped, public, impossible to take back in exchange for whatever the system decides his freedom is worth. I put him to it, and in front of the whole regional channel, where the cursed water lie had been told and the verification token had killed it, the raider's own confession wrote itself into the record for anyone to read. Kang Teo had sent them. The point was not to harass me or scare me off, and it was not about breaking a rival's trade. Teo had ordered a value assessment. He had sent 5 men to find out exactly what was inside my fence, what gear, what stores, what the puddle was really worth, because he had watched too many rare drops come up out of dead last water, and he had seen through the worm farmer story as plainly as I had. The raid was not an attack, it was an appraisal. He was deciding whether my source was worth the cost of taking it for real, and the confession told the whole region he had decided it might be. I stood there a while with that, turning it over. For weeks, the worm farmer story had been my armor, the appraisal masking my depth, the whole region laughing at the puddle, while I dug it deeper underneath them. That armor had just cracked, not all the way. The chat still saw rank 8 billion. The scans still read the mask. But Kang Teo had stopped believing the mask, and Teo was the one whose belief mattered, because he was the one with the men in the lake and the will to come take what he wanted. The disguise had bought me everything I had built. It would not buy me much longer. The time my appraisal could keep hiding me was running out, and I had felt it run out tonight, in a confession I forced out of a man stuck to his hip in my own mud. That changed the shape of everything. I could have outlasted someone who only wanted to scare me off. Teo had decided my source was a prize worth stealing, which meant he was coming back, with more, until he had it or until taking it cost him more than it was worth. I let the captured raider go once the confession was logged, because a freed man carries the story back better than a held one, and I wanted Teo to know his assessment had been assessed right back. Then I stood in my trap field in the dark with 4 men's blood drying in the oil, and one truth made plain. The next time would not be 5 men testing a fence. The next time would be Teo coming to take the pond, so I made the pond harder to take. I had the rare lake pearl from the chest, and a pearl like that is upgrade material of a grade I'd never held, and with Teo's intent now stamped in the public record, I was not going to sit on it and wait. I fed it to the source along with the cores and the coins and everything I'd been holding back, and I forced the next step the same way I had forced everyone since the storm. Deep fishing hole upgraded. Monster pond. The water changed under me again, and this time the change had weight to it. The pond went deeper, darker, somehow heavier. The cold off it stronger, and the system's name for it was not a description anymore but a warning to anyone reading it from across the grass. Monster pond. A source that held season rank things now, the kind of water the strongest survivors in a region built their power on. I kept the expansion token buried and untouched through all of it, because the token would have grown my holding wide and loud, and what I wanted was to grow it deep and quiet. One more time, before Teo came. Deep had saved me from the dry wind, and given me the catfish and the carp and the rod. It was the only bet I had ever won out here, and I was not going to stop making it now. Sitting on the token was the hardest patience of all, because it was the one thing that could have made me big overnight, and big was what the whole world respected. But big was also exactly what Teo was, and 3 weeks out here had shown me that being big did nothing to keep me from being drowned. So the token stayed in the ground, my secret waiting for a day I chose, while the pond went deeper instead, where no one watching from the grass could measure how far down my real strength ran. The monster pond had been mined for less than a day when it grew a dock post. It came up out of the rim on its own, a single thick post of dark wood the system set there without my asking, and I understood it as a marker. My water had reached a size that needed a dock, that expected a place to stand and work over deep water. It should have counted as an achievement, and for about a minute it did. Then the surface of the monster pond stirred, far out in the middle, and something rose under it that put a shadow across the whole deep, and the good feeling went somewhere else. The forecast and depth sense reached for it together and came back with a name I felt in my teeth. Mud-crowned turtle. Season rank. The system was plain about what it was, plainer than it had been about anything since the welcome. A boss this size did not just live in a monster pond. It judged one. It would either evolve the source into something far greater, if I could take it, or it would crush the pond and everything I had built around it back into the mud if I could not. Evolve or destroy. The pond had grown big enough to call down the thing that decided which. I should have been afraid, and underneath I was. A season rank boss had crushed plenty of stronger setups than mine, and a wrong move against this one did not cost me a fight, it cost me the pond. The dungeon, the buried token, the whole holding I had bled 3 weeks to build. But the fear was useful by now, and I had learned to read it. It told me to study the thing before I touched it, to use every day the turtle gave me before it moved. And, under all of it, the same thing the eel had taught me on the first day with its teeth in my hand. I would beat the biggest thing in the water by waiting it out in the smallest space I could pin it to, and taking it at the one moment it opened up. Ciola saw my face and looked out at the water, then back at the grass where Teo's watchers had not gone home, and she said the thing we were both thinking, which was that the timing could not have been worse. Or depending on how you held it, better. A season-ranked boss rising in my pond. On the same nights Teo's men sat in the grass deciding whether to come and take it. If I lost to the turtle, Teo would walk in and claim a dead source and call it mercy. If I beat it, I would have a pond that even a rival who owned a whole small sea would think twice about touching. I stood on my new dock post over water that had just gone still. The stillness that comes right before the biggest thing in it decides to move. The unique rod sat in my hands. A buried token waited under my feet. A season I had not chosen was rising up out of the dark, and I started, the only way I ever started anything out here, to work out where the soft place was. A thing the size of a boat does not move fast, and that slowness was the only mercy the mud-crowned turtle gave me. It sat out in the deep of my pond for a full day after it rose, a shell broad as my tent ridged with a crust of mud and stone the system had named a crown, watching the surface with one eye while I got ready to kill it. I used the time. The system tells you what is coming, and I heard the warning and spent it getting ready instead of spending it being afraid. I strung the unique rod with the catfish whisker line. I put on everything I had built since the first day. The fish skin vest with its new plates, shell guards up both forearms, the chest crab shell worked in over the chest, grip gloves, shell boots, so the wet rim would not slide me into the water at the wrong moment. I mixed the strongest bait Soye had ever sent me, a paste built to pull the biggest thing in the deep straight up to a hungry surface. And I finished the fence. I had bled to build that wall and bled again when the catfish smashed it, and I laid the last of the new brick and set the rod-eater teeth back along the top of it, because the fence was not only defense against the turtle, The fence was going to be my weapon. Ciola set herself at the rim where she could read the whole pond at once, ribs still wrapped but her sense sharp as ever, and out past the grass Teo's watchers settled in to see whether the worm farmer was about to be crushed by his own water. I did not mind the audience. Let them watch. If I was about to do the impossible, I could stand having witnesses, win or lose, and either way the turtle was rising, and either way this was happening now. I will not pretend I slept the night before. You do not sleep the night before you fight a thing that can crush everything you own, and I spent the dark hours the same as I had spent the first night of the world, feeding the fire, checking my gear, counting what I had against what the morning would ask. The difference was that on the first night I had a bent hook in a hole full of mud, and now I had a unique rod, a wall with teeth, a partner reading my water, and 3 weeks of learning how to kill things bigger than me. I was still the underdog. I had taught myself to fight back, and against a seasoned boss, that gap between underdog and helpless was the only thing keeping me alive. Then I baited the deep and called it up. It came toward the surface slow and enormous, the crown breaking the water first, then the great flat bulk of the shell, then one clawed foot reaching up to find the rim of my dock, and the whole pond shifted around the weight of it. The system had not exaggerated. This was a season rank thing, and it was bigger than anything I had pulled or fought or imagined pulling. And the first plan a man's mind reaches for, drag it out and finish it on land, was a plan to die by. I never tried to pull it out. You do not pull a boat out of the water with a fishing rod. And the turtle weighed more than a boat. And if I set myself against that much weight with a line in my hands, it would take the line, my arms, my life, all of it in one pull. So I did not fight its strength. I fought its size, which is a different thing, and the difference was the only reason I had a chance. The first thing I did was make it hit the fence. I set the hook and I did not haul. I steered. I used the rod to turn its head, to put the bait and the pain where I wanted its bulk to go, and I walked it into my own wall. A thing that size cannot stop itself fast, and when it drove into the fence the brick took the blow and the turtle rang itself against a wall that did not move, and for a moment the great body was checked and stunned against the one immovable thing on my whole plot. Brick again. Always brick. The wall that had turned the night beasts and pinned the carp now stood between me and a seasoned boss, and it held, and every time the turtle threw itself I aimed the throw into the brick instead of into me. It nearly took me twice anyway. Once a sweep of that tail caught the dock and shattered the post I was standing on, and I went down hard on the rim, and the turtle's shadow came over me, and only a shove off the broken brick got me clear before the crown came down where my legs had been. Once the whole pond surged as it dove, and the suck of the water nearly pulled me off the bank after it, and the anchor rope and Ciola's shout were the only two things that kept me on dry mud. I have never worked so hard to simply not die. Against a thing that size I was not really fighting at all. I was surviving it, again and again, for as long as it took, hoping it would tire of throwing its weight at brick before I tired of getting out of the way. Ciola read the rest of it for me. A thing that big moves the whole pond when it turns, and she felt the water gather before the turtle did anything. The pressure of it shifting as the bulk prepared to roll or lunge or pull, and she called each one a half breath before it came. I could not have watched all of that thing at once. She watched the water and I watched the gap, and between us we always knew which way the weight was about to go. When she called a roll, I had the brick ready. When she called a pull, I had already given ground to the anchor. I was never faster than the turtle. With Ciola reading the deep, I did not have to be. I only had to be in the right place when the slow, enormous thing arrived, and then I went to work on the joints. A shell that wide has to open somewhere to move. At the legs, at the neck, the soft hinges where the armor gives so the body underneath can walk, turn, reach. Those were the places, and the fishbone spear with its rod-eater teeth was finally a tool equal to the job. I did not stab the shell. Stabbing the shell breaks your spear and teaches the turtle where your hand is. I waited for the body to commit to a turn, for a leg to drive and the hinge behind it to open, and I cut the joint when it opened and gave ground before the turtle could bring its weight back around. Then I waited, and the next time it turned the other way I cut the other side. It bled into the water, slow, and it got slower, and slower was all I needed, because the turtle did not have to die fast. It only had to die before I made a mistake. That was the whole fight, hour after hour of it. Cut and give ground. Wait for the turn. Cut the other side. Let the brick take the rage. Read Ciola's calls and be somewhere the weight was not. It did not look heroic and it did not look like much. A small soaked man circling a wounded giant in a churned up pond, cutting it a little at a time and running the rest. But I had stopped expecting my fights to look like anything. The lake owners in the chat fished their water for sport, big hauls and bigger boasts. I fished mine to clear a debt, slow and stubborn, one payment at a time, and the debt I was clearing was a seasoned boss, and I was clearing it. It made its mistake first. Near the end, hurt, slowed, furious, it did the thing every cornered armored thing in this world had done, the thing the eel had not lived long enough to learn, and the shell-backed fish had taught me, and the carp had confirmed. It reared up. It lifted its whole front off the water to bring the crown and all that weight down on the dock and on me, to crush the small thing that had been cutting it, and in rearing up it opened the one place the crown could never cover. The soft throat under the lifted shell, the gap exactly where depth sense had been telling me it would be since the fight began. Ciola called it the same instant the sense lit it. I put the unique rod's hook into that gap and set it with my whole weight. Where the gotcha rod would have snapped and even the basic might have bent, the unique held and bit deep into the soft place. The turtle came down wrong. Hooked through the throat, the killing drop turned into the thing that killed it. It hit the dock hard enough to crack the post and went still in the shallows, and the pond settled around the body, and for a long moment the only sound was my own breathing and the water lapping against a dead seasoned boss in water that used to be a puddle. The mud-crowned turtle paid out a haul the chat would have called a season's luck for a lake owner, and it had come up out of a hole the chat still drew pictures of. The chest that rose off it was not silver. It was gold, a tear up, the first gold chest I had ever seen, heavy and warm, the seal still on it. A massive turtle core, bigger than my two fists together, so dense with stored value it was warm before the light reached it. A stack of turtle shell plates, the best armor material in the region. A run of lake coins that ended my counting somewhere past any number I had held since the old world. A mud-crown armor blueprint, and a bundle of storm survival designs I knew I could sell into a market that was always one bad night from needing them. There was a token too, set apart marked Season Duel, and I did not understand yet what it was for. I would, within the hour. I crafted what I could of the mud crown armor that evening, plates of that thick shell layered over the vest, the best protection I had ever worn. I sold the storm survival bundle into the dry wind market and the coins came in heavy. I kept the core, because a core that size was not a thing you spent on a single upgrade without thinking hard about it. And then the core stopped me, because of what was on it. Pressed into the surface of the turtle core, worn but clear, was a mark. A spiral, cut through with a single straight line. I had seen it once before, down in the dark on the frame of the root door at the bottom of my first dungeon. The made door that should not have existed in a world 3 weeks old. The turtle had been carrying the same mark as the door. The same mark as a thing built by hands before any of us arrived. I turned the core in my fingers and felt the cold of the rod rune come back up through me. And the pipe, and the broken old rods, all of it the same single fact, wearing different faces. The made place was down there. It had a mark. And its mark was on the monster that had risen out of my own pond to judge it. It made a kind of sense I did not like. If the depth was a made place, then the things guarding it were not wild monsters at all. They were wardens. The rod eater in the room of broken rods. The catfish over a chest the forecast could not read. The turtle wearing the builder's own mark and rising the moment my pond grew deep enough to threaten whatever was below. Each one bigger and older than the last. Each one standing between me and something someone had gone to great trouble to bury. I was not climbing a fishing ladder. I was digging into someone's grave, and the grave had guards, and they got worse the deeper I went. I set the core with the things that did not fit, in the part of my head that was filling up faster than I liked, and I turned to deal with the man who picked exactly that moment to make his move. Kang Teo had been watching the whole fight, and a worm farmer killing a seasoned boss did something to him that the cursed water lie and the failed raid had only started. He understood, finally and completely, what I had spent 3 weeks making sure he could not prove. The rare drops, the verified water, the survival goods, the dried food his own crew bought in secret, and now a gold chest off a seasoned rank turtle. His monopoly was quantity, the endless common fish only a giant lake could supply, and I was trading rare value out of a deep puddle and beating quantity in a market quantity was supposed to own. He could not buy me out. He could not slander me. He could not rob me. So he reached for the one tool left, the one that did not care how strong I had gotten, only how exposed. He used a seasoned duel token, the same kind the turtle had just dropped into my pack, and the system opened a notice across the whole region with both our names on it. A water source duel. Public, system scored, system binding, and the stake written plain underneath in the part Teo wanted everyone to read. The loser's source could be claimed by the winner. He forced it before I could stabilize, before the chest pawn settled, before I had even finished crafting the turtle's armor, because he thought he was catching a man at his weakest moment and dragging a mud hole off him in front of the whole region. He made it public on purpose. He wanted the worm farmer's loss to be a show. Here is what Teo did not understand, because my catch appraisal had spent 3 weeks lying to every scan that reached him. He thought he knew what my source was worth. The duel was about to tell us both. The water source duel did not pit my muscle against his, or my lake against his lake, which was the fight he wanted and the only fight he could win. It scored us. The system itself measured both our sources, in the open, on every axis that actually mattered in a survival migration, and it read the numbers out one line at a time while the whole region went quiet to watch. Clean water. Verified, filtered, sold daily and never once failing a test. Mine far past his, because his lake was wide and open, and the dry wind had turned it foul while my deep cold water stayed clean. Rare catch value. My eel core and shellbacked core and grassjaw core and the massive turtle core against his bins of common fish. Not close. Blueprint contribution. Every design I had put into the market that other survivors used to stay alive. Fire filters, storage, repair oil, against Teo, who had only ever sold the same trout 10,000 times. Combat catch records. A solo puddle owner who had killed an eel, a shell-backed fish, a rod eater, a grassjaw catfish, a bladefin carp, and a season-ranked turtle. Alone, with gear he built himself. Shelter stability. trade usefulness, survival rank. Line after line, the score climbed on my side and sat flat on his, because Teo had built wide and I had built deep. And the system had been quietly measuring depth the whole time while the chat measured width and laughed. And as it scored, the mask came off. That was the part I had known was coming since the night I forced the Raider's confession. The part I had spent 3 weeks delaying and could not delay through a system-binding duel. The catch appraisal that had hidden my real depth from every scan could not hide it from the duel itself. The system laid my true value out in the open. All of it. The depth I had buried, the cores I had pulled, the worth of a source that read rank 8 billion on every casual scan, and scored like nothing the region had seen when it finally counted for real. For 3 weeks, the chat had ranked me dead last and drawn pictures of my puddle. Now the same chat watched the system's own numbers and understood that the worm farmer they had laughed at had been outvaluing the owner of a private sea since the 2nd week. I won. The system said it plainly, in the same flat voice it used for everything, with no ceremony at all. And then it did the thing that mattered more than the winning, which was that it had said all of that in public, and it could not be unsaid. The mockery did not just stop, it turned into something I trusted even less, which was respect, and under the respect, fear. Buyers who had never answered me sent offers. Survivors who had repeated the cursed water lie went quiet, then went looking to trade. The worm farmer name stuck, but the joke drained out of it. It became the name of the one who had fooled the whole region and taken its money while it laughed at his coat. And that kind of name gets said with a very different weight. Teo kept his lake, because the duel only took a source if the loser could not cover the margin, and he was rich enough to pay it down rather than lose his water. But he lost the only thing his whole power had ever rested on, which was the idea that biggest was best. That the man with the most water was the man who mattered. Everyone had seen the score now. His whole power was being the biggest, and that power did not survive the day the system put my numbers over his in front of 8 billion people. I did not gloat, even then, even with the whole region finally seeing it. Gloating is for men who need the crowd's opinion, and I had stopped needing it somewhere around the first storm. But I will admit the number landed somewhere in me that the rank 8.4 billion had landed 3 weeks before, and this time it landed the other way. Dead last had been a fact I put down and walked away from. This was a fact too, the system's own count, public and stamped, impossible to argue, that the worst source in the migration had become one of the best. I let myself hold it for about as long as I had let myself feel warm by that first fire, 10 seconds. And then I set it down too, because Teo was still out there with a lake and a crew, and a new and dangerous reason to hate me. Humiliated men are more dangerous than confident ones. I had just humiliated the biggest man in the region in front of everyone he ruled, and a smart man does not celebrate that. He prepares for it. The win did more than humble Teo. It moved my pond. The duel was a seasoned duel, and winning one the way I had, dead last beating a small sea on pure value, met a condition the system had been holding over my water since the turtle died. The monster pond pulled down and changed, the surface darkening, the deep opening wider, and the system wrote the new name in the pale light over a thing that had been a sour brown puddle 20-some days ago. Monster pond, upgraded. Chest pond, a chest pond. The name told me what it was before I felt it. A source that now held what monsters guard. Treasure water. A pond that paid in chests on top of fish. I stood on my cracked dock and looked down into water I could no longer see the bottom of. Water that had drowned a seasoned boss and barely noticed. The thing I had been handed dead last on the first day had become, quietly and without the chat ever quite believing it, one of the richest sources in the region. Worst rank in the whole migration. And now this. I was starting to think the system had a sense of humor, and that the joke had been on everyone but me. Ciola stood with me on the dock and looked at the new water, and she said the thing out loud that the chat would take days to admit. She said I was not a survivor scraping by anymore. She said, in her flat way, that I had built a power, the kind that men like Teo notice, and the kind that men like Teo come for, and that the same numbers that had just vindicated me in front of the region had also painted a target on my pond, bigger than any cursed water rumor ever could. Winning the duel had not made me safer. It had made me worth taking, and proved to everyone watching exactly how much I was worth. I knew it already. But it is one thing to know a thing, and another to hear someone you trust say it at the edge of the water you are about to descend into. The earlier upgrades had settled and gone quiet. The chest pond did not. The day after the duel, the water at the center of it began to turn, slow and dark. A current going down where no current should, pulling toward the deep in a way that had nothing to do with the pipe Ciola had found. I knelt at the dock and put depth sense into it, and the current had a color the rest of the pond did not. A thread of black running down into the dark, and the system marked it with a line that stopped me cold. Treasure current open. Descent leads to an abyss pond beneath drowned houses. Drowned houses. The system had never used a word like houses for anything under my water, and now it used it plainly, an abyss beneath drowned houses. Because I already knew, or half knew, and the line put the half-knowing into words I could not look away from. The buried clay pipe, the made door with its mark, and the same mark on the turtle's core. A place built by hands, drowned, buried under the grass, and now the system was telling me the way down to it ran through my own pond, into an abyss, beneath houses where people had once lived before the water took them. Ciola stood at the rim and read the black current with her own sense, and her face did the thing it had done over the pipe, went still and far away. She said quietly that she had felt deep currents like this under a few of the oldest sources she ever scouted for Teo, and been told to stop asking, and that she had never once heard the system say the word houses out loud. We both stood there with it, a treasure current pulling down into a drowned world. On the day I had become rich and visible enough that Teo would have to come for me in earnest, with an abyss opening under my feet that held the answer to every wrong thing I had found since the rod room. I looked at the black thread turning in my water, and at the dead turtle's marked core in my pack, and out at the grass where Teo's watchers had not gone home. I was standing on top of something far bigger than a fishing migration. The only way to learn what it was led down, into the dark, beneath the drowned houses, where the whole of it had been waiting under the grass for someone dead last enough to dig all the way to the bottom. Before I went down into the abyss, I opened the gold chest because a man does not climb into a drowned world on yesterday's gear. The turtle's chest gave up the things I would need for exactly where I was going, and I had the feeling the system knew it. A skin of deep lamp oil that burned slow and steady, and did not drown easily. A length of better rope, longer and stronger than the line I had been lowering myself on since the eel. And a bait the system named Depth Pearl, a small hard pearl of a thing that smelled of nothing to me, and, I would learn, of a feast to whatever lived at the bottom of the world. I built what I could around the rest of it, and I packed for a long dark. I want to be honest about how the treasure current felt, because it did not feel like the dungeon. The level 1 dungeon in the rod room had been close. A short drop, a known dark, a place I could climb out of in a hurry if it went wrong. The treasure current was not that. It was a thread of cold black water turning down through the floor of my pond into a deep that had no bottom I could sense, and the moment I lowered myself into it I understood I was leaving the part of the world I knew. The light of my pond shrank above me until it was a coin, then a spark, then gone. The water turned old, heavy, so cold it ached, and down was the only direction there was, down past where the rod room had been, down past anything my pond had ever shown me, into the abyss the system had named beneath the drowned houses. I roped myself the only way I trusted, 3 knots around the buried rock, and I counted my line out by the arm's length as I sank, because everything that could kill me down here came back to 3 things. The rope, which was my only way home. The light, which was the only thing keeping the dark from being total. And the air in my chest, which was running shorter the deeper I went. I could fight a monster. I could not fight a snapped rope or a dead lamp, or my own failing lungs. And so I went slow, and I checked all 3 at every depth. And I did not let the dark rush me, because the abyss does not kill you with teeth. It kills you with distance, by being further from the sun than your rope or your light or your breath can reach. And then it lets the teeth finish what the distance started. There is a kind of fear that comes only with depth, and I met it on the way down. Up in the dungeon, I had always been able to feel the surface, to know a few hard pulls on the rope would put my face back in the air, down the treasure current that knowing went away. There was no surface anymore, only more dark below and a thinning thread of rope above. Somewhere in the cold, my mind kept offering me the thought that the rope was already too long, that I had gone past the point where any rope could be trusted. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to climb back now while the lamp was full. I did not climb back, but I marked the thought because fear that talks sense to you is the most useful fear there is, and it was telling me the truth about exactly how far from home I could get down here before the dark turned from a place I was visiting into a place I lived. And then the current let me out into a room. Not a cave, a room. I had braced for a cave for more of the mud, root, and packed earth of the dungeon. What the treasure current opened into instead had straight walls that met at corners. It had a floor, or what had been a floor and was now a ceiling, because the whole room hung in the cold black water with everything in it turned the wrong way up. A table drifted above me, legs toward the dark overhead. Chairs nosed against what had once been the roof, and along one wall stood a row of cupboards, wooden fitted, their doors hanging open or swinging slow in the current. And through the gaps in the walls where the wood had finally given up, fish moved in and out, living in the cracks of a thing that had been built for people. I moved through it slow, the lamp throwing its small circle of light across surfaces no light had touched in longer than the world had supposedly existed. The wood had gone soft and dark with the water, but it had not rotted away, held by the cold and the deep, so that everything kept its shape. A bowl still sat on a shelf, fixed there by silt. A door in an inner wall hung on one hinge. There was a smaller chair among the others, low, made for someone small, and I looked at it longer than I should have, and then made myself look away, because some facts are easier carried if you do not let your mind put a face to them. It was a house. I knelt there in the cold black water of my own abyss, and I knew exactly what I was looking at, because it was a thing I had come from. I had lived in rooms like this. I had sat at a table like that in a life that felt 100 years gone now, in a world with kitchens, cupboards, and chairs. And here was one of those rooms at the bottom of a pond in a world the system swore was 3 weeks old, furnished, lived in, drowned. Not a ruin built to look old, a home. Somebody had eaten at that table. Somebody had kept things in those cupboards and shut those doors at night. And then the water had come, or the world had come, and taken all of it down into the dark and left it hanging here upside down for a dead last fisherman to find. I had spent 3 weeks calling my Puddle the worst luck in the migration. Standing in that drowned room, I was not so sure anymore. The lake owners up in the sun had been handed wide, bright water with nothing under it but mud and fish, and they would fish it and brag about it, and never once learn what their world was sitting on top of. I had been handed the one source small enough to force me down, all the way down, to the floor of the thing, where the truth was. Worst luck in the migration, or the only luck that led anywhere real. By now I half suspected those were the same thing. The broken rods in the rod room had been the first whisper of it. The pipe had been the second. The sigil on the turtle's core the third. This was not a whisper. This was the whole truth standing in front of me with its doors swinging open. An old world had lived here. People had lived here, in houses with tables and cupboards. And something had drowned the whole of it and buried it under a grassland and called the grassland new. We had not been dropped onto an empty world to fish it. We had been dropped on top of a grave with the furniture still in it, and told it was a fresh start. I did not have long to stand in that, because the house had things living in it now, and they had felt me arrive. The drowned nailfish came first, out of the dark corners of the room where the cupboards met the wall. They were pale, blind, edged with spines along the back, long nails of bone that stood up when they struck, and they hunted by the push of the water, the same as the blind fish in the dungeon, only meaner, faster, barbed. The mud crown armor earned its place the first second they hit me. Spines that would have opened me up a week ago skidded off the turtle shell plates and the shell guards, and I put the fishbone spear through the ones that committed and let the armor turn the rest, keeping my back to a solid wall and giving the dark as little of me to feel as I could. They came in numbers, more of them than the dungeon's blind fish, and they did not tire and they did not scare. For a stretch it was just me with my back to a drowned wall in the cold black, working the spear in short controlled strokes. I took one and turned two, and never once let them get behind me into the dark where I could not feel them coming. I could not win that by killing all of them. There were too many. I could only hold and clear a path and keep moving toward the cupboards that were the reason I had come, and trust the armor to take what I could not stop. That is most of what fighting in the abyss is. Not victory. Endurance. In the cold, in the dark, with a rope at your back, until you have what you came for and can leave. The chest leeches were worse, because the chest leeches did not strike. They drifted slow and patient, and they latched, fastening onto an arm or a leg and clamping down to hold, while they fed, and once 3 of them were on me in that cold black water I was bleeding off. Strength I could not spare with a rope still to climb. I burned them off against the sealed flame, one at a time, and I learned fast to watch the slow drifting things as carefully as the fast striking ones, because in the abyss the thing that kills you quietly is usually worse than the thing that comes at you loud. And then there was the clam. It sat in the corner of the room where the best cupboard hung half open, a clam the size of a door. Its shell parted just wide enough to look like the dark went deeper there, and depth sense felt the wrongness of it before my eyes worked it out. It was waiting. A thing that big, that still, parked exactly where I would reach to put my arm into a promising cupboard, was not resting. It was a trap with a mouth. I had reached past a clam like it once, down in the rod room, and the lesson had held, so I did not put my hand anywhere near it. I took the abyss nail hooks I had pulled from this very room, lashed one to the spear, and reached into the cupboard behind the clam on the end of the hook instead of with my hand. The clam slammed shut on the hook, and the empty water where my arm was supposed to be, hard enough to have taken the arm off at the elbow. And while it strained to open again, I took what the cupboard held and backed away and left it grinding on nothing. It would still be there grinding when I came back, I knew. The abyss did not clean up after itself. Everything I left alive down here, I would have to pass again. A hand is not a thing you risk to a trap you can see. That is a rule that has kept all 10 of mine attached out here, and the abyss did not change it. I cleared what the room would give, the slow, careful way, the only way the abyss allows. The cupboards and the drifting silt gave up a haul unlike anything the dungeon had paid. Abyss nail hooks, harder than the rod-eater teeth, a whole set of them, a waterproof storage blueprint, and I understood the worth of it the instant I read it, surrounded by water on every side. An old house key, iron, cold, heavier than it should have been, cut for a lock somewhere deeper in the house. A handful of drowned coins from a mint that was not the system's. Old money for an old world. A torn piece of a map that did not show a room but a row of them. This house and a passage past it and more rooms beyond. A whole sunken structure stretching off into the dark. And, in a cupboard that had somehow held against the water, a sealed jar of grain. I went up before the rope bore through. That was the discipline the abyss demanded above all others, and the one most likely to get a greedy man killed. There is always one more cupboard, always a reason to stay for the next drop, and the rope had been in cold-moving water for a long time, and my lamp was past half, and my chest was tired of the deep, and if I stayed for one more cupboard down there, the chat would stop hearing my name for good. So I climbed, counting my line back arm by arm, up out of the drowned house and the cold black and the turning dark, until the spark of my pawn grew back into a coin, and then into the whole bright surface. I dragged myself onto the dock and breathed the open air of a world that was at least still above the water. On the surface, I built a waterproof storage first and sold copies of the blueprint into a market that lived half its life soaked, And the coins came in easy now that the whole region knew the worm farmer's drops were real. But I kept the grain. I did not sell it and I did not open it. A sealed jar of grain, still dry, still whole, from a house that had drowned before our migration ever began, was worth more to me as proof than as any meal or any sale. It told me the abyss was not only dangerous water and old furniture, it was a place with pantries, where people had stored food against a winter the water reached before the winter did.